I never thought I'd find my 10-year-old son standing outside in 5-degree weather on Christmas night, his lips turning blue, his small body shaking so violently he couldn't speak. But there he was, locked out of the house. I'd paid $60,000 to save from foreclosure. The house where my mother and sister lived rent-free. The house I'd been supporting for 3 years, with $2,000 a month. Through the glowing windows, I could see my sister's children opening presents by the fireplace, warm and laughing. My son's presents, the ones I'd carefully wrapped and brought over, were still under that tree. But my child, he was considered trash, useless, not worth the space. My mother's last words to him echoed in my head. "You're just like your mother, useless trash taking up space." I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the door. I picked up my freezing child, put him in my car, and turned the heater on full blast. And as I sat there watching him slowly stop shivering, something inside me turned to ice colder than the winter air. They thought I was the family doormat, the one who'd always forgive, always pay, always sacrifice. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Because what I discovered in the following weeks about the money, the lies, and the will my father left behind didn't just expose them, it destroyed everything they'd built on my back. This is the story of how I took it all back. And trust me, you'll want to hear every single word. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 35 years old, a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Seattle, and for most of my life I believed that being a good daughter meant sacrificing everything without question. That belief nearly destroyed me, and it almost destroyed my son. The Christmas that changed everything started like so many others. I'd picked up an extra shift at work, pulling a 10-hour day on December 25th, because I needed the overtime pay. Not for myself, I was sending an extra $500 to my mother for the holiday on top of the $2,000 I already sent her every month. I told myself it was the right thing to do, the loving thing to do. My mother Margaret and my younger sister Lily lived in our childhood home, the same house I'd paid $60,000 to save from foreclosure 3 years earlier. They lived there rent-free while I juggled my own mortgage, my son's expenses, and their endless needs. But that's what family does, right? That's what I'd been taught since I was 15 years old when my father died and I became the designated fixer, the responsible one, the daughter who could handle anything. I'd dropped Leo off at my mother's house that morning with his overnight bag and the presents I'd carefully wrapped for him and his cousins. My sister's 3 kids were spending Christmas there, and my mother had specifically requested that Leo join them. "It'll be good for the cousins to be together," she'd said on the phone, her voice warm with the false sweetness she used when she wanted something. I should have known better. I should have remembered that warmth from my mother always came with conditions, always had a price. But I wanted to believe that this time would be different, that this Christmas she'd treat my son the way she treated Lily's children, with actual affection instead of obligation. I was wrong. When I pulled up to the house at 11 that night, my headlights caught something that didn't make sense at first. A small figure was sitting on the front steps, hunched over, surrounded by a thin cloud of vapor in the freezing air. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees, the kind of cold that bites through clothing and steals the warmth from your bones within minutes. Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully along the gutters, casting red and green shadows across the snow-covered lawn. Through the front windows, I could see the glow of the fireplace, the twinkling tree, the warm golden light that meant safety and family and home. But my son was outside in the cold. I didn't understand it at first. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Leo was wearing his thin hoodie, not his winter coat, and his small hands were tucked under his armpits, his whole body curled inward, trying to conserve heat. His breath came out in desperate little puffs of white. Next to him on the steps was his overnight bag, the one I'd packed with his pajamas and toothbrush, and the stuffed bear he still slept with, even though he thought he was too old for it. The bag had been thrown. I could tell it had landed awkwardly, spilling some of his clothes onto the snow-dusted concrete. I was out of the car before I'd even fully stopped, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Leo!" My voice came out sharp with panic. He looked up at me, and what I saw in his face made my blood run cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. It wasn't just that he was freezing, though his lips had taken on a bluish tinge and his whole body was shaking. It was the look in his eyes, confusion, shame, and something that looked horribly like acceptance, as if he'd already started to believe he deserved this. "Mom," he said through chattering teeth, and then he started to cry. I gathered him into my arms, and he was so cold that holding him felt like embracing ice. I could feel the tremors running through his small frame, violent shivers that shook us both. "What happened?" I asked, but he just buried his face in my shoulder and sobbed harder. I looked at the house, at the warm lights at the door that was firmly closed. Through the window, I could see movement. Lily's children were still up playing with new toys near the Christmas tree. My mother was visible in the kitchen doorway, her back to the window. Everything looked normal, festive, perfect, except my child had been thrown out into the freezing night like garbage. I picked Leo up. He was getting too big for this, really almost as tall as my shoulder when he stood straight. But right now, he felt small and fragile and carried him to my car. I cranked the heat to maximum and wrapped my coat around him, rubbing his arms and back, trying to force warmth back into his body. "Tell me what happened, baby. Please." His words came out between sobs and shivers. "Grandma said I was being too loud. I was just laughing at something Tyler said, but she got really mad. She said I was ruining Christmas, that I was always causing problems just like you do. She said—" He stopped, his face crumpling with fresh tears. "What did she say, Leo?" "She said I was useless trash, just like my mother. She said Aunt Lily's kids deserved a nice Christmas without us ruining it. She told me to get out and not come back until I learned to stop being a burden." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Aunt Lily was right there, Mom. She didn't say anything. She just watched Grandma push me outside and throw my bag after me." I felt something crack inside my chest, a sound like ice breaking. Not my hearts don't actually break. I'd learned that over 35 years of being my mother's emotional punching bag. What broke was something else, something that had been holding me in place my whole life. The belief that if I just tried harder, gave more, sacrificed more, my mother would finally see my worth. The hope that family meant unconditional love instead of conditional tolerance. I looked at the house again, really looked at it. The house I'd saved with $60,000 I'd inherited from my husband's grandmother, money we'd planned to use for Leo's college fund. The house that had my mother's name on the deed and my money in its foundation. The house I'd been supporting for 3 years with $2,000 a month while my mother and sister lived there, paying nothing, contributing nothing, appreciating nothing. I'd done it all because I thought that's what love looked like. Sacrifice without limits, giving without boundaries, helping without expectations. But sitting there in my car with my shivering son wrapped in my coat, I finally saw the truth. I had never belonged in that house. Even when I lived there as a child, I was never treated like family. I was treated like a resource to be exploited, a servant to be used, a scapegoat to absorb my mother's frustrations and my sister's inadequacies. And now they were doing the same thing to Leo, passing down the poison of their dysfunction to another generation. The heater was starting to work. Leo's shivering was slowing, color returning to his face. But before I could put the car in drive, before I could take us home and away from this place, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes that looked so much like his father's, and he asked the question that shattered what was left of my silence. "Mom, am I really useless, like Grandma said?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. This Christmas didn't just break my heart. It broke my silence, my acceptance, my willingness to keep pretending that abuse was love as long as it came from family. And it woke something in me that had been sleeping for far too long, the part of me that knew how to fight back. I drove us home in silence. Leo curled against me in the front seat, even though he should have been in the back. I didn't care about car seat laws right then. I just needed him close, needed to feel his warmth and know he was safe. When we got home, David met us at the door, took one look at our faces, and asked no questions. He just helped me get Leo into a hot bath, then into warm pajamas, then into bed with extra blankets and his favorite stuffed bear. Our son fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from cold and crying and confusion. I should have slept too. It was nearly midnight and I had to work the day after Christmas, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind circling the same thoughts over and over like a dog chasing its tail, getting nowhere but increasingly agitated. David's breathing was deep and even beside me, and I envied him that peace. My body was exhausted, but my brain wouldn't shut off. It kept replaying Leo's question, "Am I really useless like Grandma said?" And then it started replaying other moments, other words, other Christmases and birthdays and ordinary days that suddenly didn't seem so ordinary anymore. I was 8 years old the first time I understood that love in our family was rationed, and I wasn't getting an equal share. It was winter, and my father had bought me a beautiful new coat, red with toggles, and a hood lined with soft fleece. I'd tried it on in the store and felt like a princess. But when we got home, Lily, who was only 5, started crying because she wanted a red coat too, and hers was blue. My mother had knelt down, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Emma, you're the big sister. You're stronger than Lily. You don't need the fancy coat as much as she does. Let her have it and you can wear your old one. It still fits." The old one had a broken zipper and a torn pocket, but I handed over the red coat because that's what good big sisters did. That's what love looked like, my mother had told me. Sacrifice. And Lily stopped crying, and my mother smiled at me with approval, and I felt warm despite the broken zipper because I'd done the right thing. I'd earned my mother's smile. That was the first lesson. There would be hundreds more. When I was 16, I got a job at a local grocery store working after school and weekends. I was saving for college because my grades were good, and I had dreams of becoming an accountant, of having a career and independence. Lily was 13 then, and my mother enrolled her in piano lessons, art classes, dance. "Your sister is so creative," my mother would say, beaming. "She has such talent. Not everyone is meant for books like you, Emma. Lily has emotional intelligence, which is much more valuable in the real world." I worked 20 hours a week on top of my schoolwork and gave half my paychecks to my mother to help with bills. Lily never worked. She was too delicate, too artistic, too special to waste her time on something as mundane as a job. When I was 22, fresh out of college with my accounting degree and my first real job, I sent $500 home every month. My father had died 2 years earlier, and my mother claimed she couldn't manage the bills alone. Lily was 19 by then, supposedly taking community college classes, but mostly she was finding herself, which apparently required trips to Portland, San Francisco, even a 3-week jaunt to Hawaii that I partially funded. When I gently suggested that maybe Lily could get a job to help out, my mother's voice turned cold. "Not everyone is built like you, Emma. Your sister is going through a hard time. She's sensitive. She needs support, not pressure." Lying there in my bed 35 years into this pattern, I finally saw it clearly. Every success I'd ever achieved had been turned into a weapon against me. I graduated college with honors, and my mother's response was, "Well, you were always good at books, not like your sister who has real emotional intelligence." When David and I bought our first home, my mother said, "That's nice, dear. Of course you didn't have a child to support like Lily did. It's easy to save money when you're not sacrificing for someone else." When I got promoted to senior accountant, she'd shrugged and said, "Some people are just lucky with jobs." But Lily. Every failure was reframed as bravery. When she quit her third job in 2 years, she was brave for knowing her worth. When her relationship fell apart because her boyfriend got tired of supporting her, she was going through such a hard time. When she moved back home at 28 with 3 children from 2 different fathers, both of whom had disappeared, she was doing her best as a single mother. The comparison wasn't even subtle. It was systematic, deliberate, designed to keep me in my place. I was the competent one, which meant I didn't need love or praise or support. I could handle everything on my own. Lily was the struggling one, which meant she deserved all the family's emotional and financial resources. My mother had assigned us our roles before we were old enough to protest, and we'd been playing them ever since. I'd been paying for everything, not just with money but with my self-worth, my boundaries, my peace, while never actually belonging to the family I was supporting. I was the ATM, the emotional support system, the crisis manager. But I wasn't the daughter who got Christmas morning warmth or proud phone calls to friends or unconditional acceptance. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hall to check on Leo. He was sprawled across his bed, one arm thrown over his bear, his face peaceful in sleep. 10 years old. The same age I'd been when I started learning that love was something you earned through service, not something freely given. And tonight my mother had started teaching him the same toxic lesson. If I've spent my entire life sacrificing to keep this family together, and they still treat me like garbage, treat my son like garbage, what exactly am I protecting? The question crystallized in my mind with painful clarity. I wasn't protecting a family. I was protecting a dysfunction. I was enabling a system where I was exploited, and my son was collateral damage. The family I'd been trying to save didn't actually include me. It never had. I was just the bank they'd been draining, the emotional dumping ground, the scapegoat who absorbed all their failures and inadequacies so they never had to face consequences. I walked back to my bedroom, but instead of getting into bed, I grabbed my laptop from my desk. Something was nagging at me, a memory from 20 years ago that I'd buried because it hurt too much to examine. My father, a week before he died, holding my hand and saying, "Emma, I've made sure you're taken care of. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." At the time, I'd thought he was just being sentimental, saying goodbye in his way. But what if it was more than that? What if he'd actually made arrangements? Legal arrangements that my mother had never told me about. I opened my laptop, the screen's blue light harsh in the dark room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then I typed, "How to find old legal documents from 20 years ago." The search results loaded, and I started reading. Probate records, estate documents, wills. My heart was pounding now, but not from fear. From something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. I spent the next hour falling down a rabbit hole of legal websites, learning about probate records and estate documents and how long counties are required to keep them. Washington state kept probate records indefinitely, I discovered. If my father had filed a will, it should still exist somewhere in the King County archives. The question was whether he'd actually filed one, or whether my mother had told me the truth all those years ago when she said he'd died without making any legal arrangements. I closed the laptop, finally, my eyes burning from screen fatigue, but my mind was racing even faster than before. I couldn't remember the weeks after my father's funeral clearly. I'd been 15, drowning in grief, and suddenly responsible for things no teenager should have to manage. The memories were there, but they were fragmented, like looking at a shattered mirror, where you can see pieces of the reflection but not the whole picture. What I did remember clearly was the morning after the funeral. I'd woken up to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table staring blankly at a pile of bills spread out in front of her. She looked small and lost her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Lily, who was only 12, was still asleep. My mother had looked up at me and said in a voice so defeated it scared me, "I don't know how to do this alone. Your father always handled the finances. I don't even know what bills we have or when they're due." So I'd sat down at that table at 15 years old and started sorting through the papers. Electric bill, water, mortgage, insurance. I'd made a list, organized them by due date, and started calling companies to set up payment plans we could afford on my mother's part-time income as a receptionist. I'd done it because someone had to, and my mother was falling apart, and Lily was too young. It never occurred to me to ask why my mother couldn't learn these things herself. Why a widow in her 40s with 2 daughters to support wouldn't force herself to figure out basic household management. Instead, it became my job. I managed the bills. I made sure Lily got to school on time and did her homework. I cooked dinners when my mother was too depressed to get out of bed, which was most days for the first 6 months. I became the adult of the household while still being treated like a child when it came to decision-making. When I suggested we should cut back on Lily's expensive extracurricular activities to save money, my mother had shut me down immediately. "You're too young to understand what your sister needs. This isn't your decision to make." But paying the bills. Somehow I was old enough for that responsibility. The pattern had been set in those first terrible months of grief, and it never changed. I was responsible enough to carry the family's burdens, but not valued enough to have a voice in the family's direction. I was the pack mule necessary, but not appreciated. And while I was managing the household, my mother was clinging to Lily with an intensity that seemed desperate even to my teenage eyes. She needed someone to need her, I understand now. Widowhood had stripped her of her identity as a wife, and she couldn't bear to lose her identity as a necessary mother, too. So she kept Lily dependent. She did Lily's laundry long after Lily was old enough to do it herself. She made Lily's doctor appointments, called Lily's teachers, managed every aspect of Lily's life while letting me fend for myself. When I asked for help with college applications, she told me I was smart enough to figure it out. When Lily struggled with basic homework, my mother spent hours tutoring her. I'd told myself it was because Lily was younger, more vulnerable, more affected by Dad's death. I told myself my mother was just doing what mothers do, protecting the weaker child. But looking back with adult eyes, I could see it wasn't protection. It was entrapment. My mother had turned Lily into a permanent dependent because she needed someone to need her. And Lily had accepted that role because it was easier than growing up, easier than taking responsibility, easier than facing the world as a capable adult. They'd formed a closed circle of two, feeding off each other's dysfunction. Margaret got to feel necessary and important by saving Lily from every challenge. Lily got to avoid the hard work of adulting by playing helpless. And where did that leave me? Outside the circle, watching through the glass, still trying to prove I was worthy of inclusion. The cruelest part was that I'd had a choice. I had a husband who loved me, a son who needed me, a career that fulfilled me, a home that was truly mine. I didn't need my mother's approval or Lily's appreciation. I didn't need to be part of their dysfunctional dynamic. I could have walked away years ago, built my life entirely separate from them, and been perfectly happy. But I hadn't. Because some broken part of me still believed that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved my worth enough, they would finally see me, finally value me, finally treat me like I belonged to the family instead of just being its unpaid support staff. That was my fatal flaw. I'd confused responsibility with love. I'd mistaken being used for being needed. I'd spent 20 years feeding a system that was designed to keep me giving, but never satisfied to keep me proving, but never proven to keep me sacrificing, but never rewarded. My silence in the face of their exploitation hadn't been noble, it had been enabling. Every time I accepted their mistreatment without complaint, I'd taught them they could get away with more. And tonight, they'd escalated to hurting my child. I was sliding back under the covers, my mind still churning, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message arriving at nearly 2 a.m. I picked it up, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness. It was from my mother. "You really embarrassed this family on Christmas? Lily is devastated by your behavior. We need to talk about your attitude." I read it once, twice, 3 times, certain I must be misunderstanding the words. My behavior, my attitude. She'd thrown my 10-year-old son out into 5-degree weather and called him useless trash, and somehow I was the one who'd embarrassed the family. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, breaking implies something sudden and dramatic. This was different. This was the sound of the last thread of tolerance finally snapping after being stretched too thin for too long. This was the moment when I stopped trying to see their perspective, stopped making excuses for their cruelty, stopped believing that family meant enduring abuse with grace. I stared at that text message, and for the first time in 35 years, I felt something besides guilt when my mother criticized me. I felt rage. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed with my phone in my hand, reading and rereading that text message from my mother, feeling the rage simmer and build into something cold and focused. By the time dawn light started creeping through the curtains, I'd made a decision. I was done pretending, done making excuses, done sacrificing myself and my son on the altar of dysfunctional family loyalty. But as I got up and started making coffee in the quiet pre-dawn kitchen, my anger began mixing with something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Or regret. Because that house, the house where my son had been thrown out into the cold last night, represented more than just real estate to me. It represented every hope I'd ever had of belonging, every dollar I'd spent trying to buy love, every sacrifice I'd made thinking this time it would be enough. 3 years ago, in the summer of 2022, my mother had called me at work, her voice shaking with panic. "Emma, I need your help. The bank is going to take the house. I'm going to lose everything your father worked for." I'd left work early, driven straight to her house, and sat at that same kitchen table where I'd sorted bills at 15 while she explained the situation. The house had a mortgage from when my father was alive, a modest loan they'd taken out to put in a new roof and upgrade the plumbing. After Dad died, my mother had been making the payments faithfully for years. But then COVID hit, she'd lost hours at her receptionist job, and she'd fallen behind. Not terribly behind, she owed about $8,000 in back payments, but enough that the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. "I'll lose the house," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "Your childhood home, the last piece of your father. I'll have nowhere to go. Lily and the kids will have nowhere to go." She'd looked at me with such desperation, such need, and I'd felt that old familiar pull. The need to fix things, the need to be the strong one, the need to finally be the daughter who saved the day and earned the gratitude and love I'd been chasing my whole life. David's grandmother had passed away that spring and left him a modest inheritance, $60,000. We'd been planning to put it toward Leo's college fund, maybe use some of it to finally renovate our outdated kitchen. But sitting there looking at my mother's tear-stained face, I'd heard myself say, "How much do you still owe on the mortgage?" The total remaining balance was $52,000. With the back payments and fees, it came to just under $60,000 to pay it off completely. I'd used every cent of that inheritance to save the house. I'd told myself I was doing it for family, for legacy, for the right reasons. But the truth I could admit now, sitting in my kitchen 3 years later, was that I'd done it hoping to finally buy my way into their hearts. I'd thought that if I saved the house, my mother would finally see me as valuable. She'd finally treat me with the warmth she gave Lily. She'd finally tell people proudly about her daughter Emma, who'd saved the family home the way she proudly told people about Lily's brave journey as a single mother. My mother had cried when I wrote that check. She'd hugged me, told me I was her angel, promised that I'd always have a place in this family, that she'd make it right somehow. "This house is yours too," she'd said. "You'll always belong here." But there was no paperwork. The house deed stayed in my mother's name only. When I'd hesitantly suggested maybe we should make it official, maybe add my name to the deed as co-owner, since I'd just paid off the entire mortgage, my mother had looked hurt. "You don't trust your own mother. You think I'd cheat you. This is family. Emma, not a business transaction." And I'd backed down, ashamed of myself for even suggesting such a thing. Of course I trusted her. Of course family didn't need legal paperwork. What a fool I'd been. The requests had started small after that. Just $500 for the property tax bill. Just $300 to fix a leaking pipe. Just $200 to help Lily with groceries because her food stamps weren't enough. Within 6 months, I was sending $2,000 a month every month like clockwork. Rent for a house I didn't live in. Expenses for a family that gave me nothing but criticism in return. I'd tried to push back once about a year ago. Lily had quit another job, her 4th in 2 years, claiming the manager was toxic, and she couldn't work in that environment. When my mother had called asking for extra money to help Lily through this transition, I'd made the mistake of suggesting maybe Lily could look for full-time work instead of the part-time positions she kept quitting. Maybe she could develop a more stable career path. Maybe it wasn't fair to expect me to subsidize her lifestyle indefinitely when she was perfectly capable of supporting herself. The silence that followed had been arctic. My mother had hung up without another word. For 2 weeks, she didn't answer my calls or respond to my texts. Then she'd finally called, her voice cold and wounded, and delivered a speech about how disappointed she was in me, how family takes care of family, How my father would be ashamed of me for abandoning my sister in her time of need. How I'd always been selfish, always thought I was better than everyone else just because I had a steady job and a stable marriage. "Your sister isn't strong like you," she'd said, making strength sound like a character flaw. "Some of us have to struggle. Some of us need help. I guess I raised you to think that makes us less valuable." The guilt had crushed me. I'd apologized. I'd sent the extra money. I'd never questioned the arrangement again, even when David gently pointed out that we were spending more on my mother and sister than we were saving for our own son's future. Now, standing in my kitchen watching the sun rise, I could see the house for what it really was. Not a home, not a family legacy, a weapon. My mother wielded it like a club, using it to beat me into submission. "How can you abandon your childhood home?" she'd say when I hesitated to send money. "If you really cared about family, you'd help save this house." And I'd been so conditioned to see myself as the family savior that I'd kept paying, kept sacrificing, kept proving my worth to people who would never acknowledge it. The house was where I had no voice but every responsibility. The house was where I was expected to fund everything but control nothing. The house was where my son got thrown into the freezing cold, but I had no right to even enter without my mother's permission. Every dollar I'd put into that house hadn't bought me belonging. It had bought my mother more power over me. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the garage, moving quietly so I wouldn't wake David and Leo. Years ago, when my mother had decided to clean out the garage and throw away my father's old files, I'd asked if I could keep his filing cabinet. She'd shrugged and said I could take whatever I wanted from that junk. I'd brought it home and stuck it in our garage, barely looking through it because it hurt too much to see his handwriting to remember him. Now I pulled open the drawers, searching through folders of old tax returns and insurance policies. And there, in the bottom drawer, I found it. A folder labeled in my father's neat printing, Estate Planning, 2004-2005. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I stood in the garage holding that folder, my heart pounding, wanting desperately to tear it open right then. But the sun was fully up now and I could hear movement in the house. Leo would be waking soon and David would need to get ready for work. Whatever secrets that folder held, they'd waited 20 years. They could wait a few more hours until I had the mental space to process them properly. I tucked the folder into my work bag, hidden under some files, and went back inside to make breakfast and pretend everything was normal. The next 2 days were a strange kind of hell. I went through the motions of regular life, work, dinner, bedtime routines while that folder burned a hole in my consciousness. I wanted to read it, but I was also terrified of what I might find. What if there was nothing important in it? What if my father's cryptic words before he died had just been the ramblings of a sick man, not a promise of legal protection? What if I was chasing ghosts while my son was suffering in the present? Because Leo wasn't okay. I could see it in the way he'd gone quiet, more withdrawn than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't playing video games or reading his favorite books. He was just existing, moving through the house like a ghost, and it was breaking my heart. It was 2 days after Christmas, while I was making dinner, when everything came to a head. I was at the stove stirring pasta sauce, and Leo came into the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight from foot to foot the way he did when he had something difficult to say. I waited, giving him space, and finally he spoke. "Mom, am I actually useless like Grandma said? Because if I am, I want to know so I can try to be better." The spoon fell from my hand, clattering against the stove and splattering red sauce across the counter. I turned to face my son, this beautiful 10-year-old boy who was asking me if he was worthless, and I felt something inside me shatter. Not break, cleanly shatter into 1,000 sharp pieces that all cut on the way down. This wasn't a child asking for reassurance. This wasn't Leo fishing for compliments or seeking comfort after his feelings were hurt. This was a child who had heard a toxic message, absorbed it like poison, and was now trying to figure out how to fix the fundamental flaw he believed existed in his character. He was asking me to confirm or deny his uselessness, the way he might ask about a math problem, clinical serious, wanting the factual answer so he could adjust his behavior accordingly. I knelt down in front of him, my hands on his shoulders, and looked into his eyes. Leo listened to me very carefully. You are not useless. You have never been useless. What Grandma said was wrong. It was cruel, and it was a lie. But even as I said the words, even as I watched his eyes fill with tears and pulled him into a hug, I could feel the weight of my own hypocrisy pressing down on me. Because I'd spent 35 years accepting that same message about myself. I'd internalized every criticism, every comparison, every indication that I wasn't quite good enough. I'd told myself I'd turned out fine, that my mother's treatment of me was just her way, that I was strong enough to handle it. But looking at my son, seeing him absorb the same poison I'd been drinking for decades, forced me to confront an unbearable truth. I hadn't turned out fine. I'd turned into a people pleaser with broken boundaries, who spent $2,000 a month trying to buy love from people who saw me as an ATM. I'd married a good man who loved me, but even with him I struggled to ask for what I needed to believe I deserved to take up space without earning it through service. I attracted users and takers because I'd been trained from childhood to believe that my value lay in my usefulness, in my ability to sacrifice without complaint. I'd been modeling this dysfunction for Leo his entire life, showing him that family can abuse you, and you just take it, that love means giving until you're empty, that your worth is measured by what you provide to others. And now he was learning the lesson. Now he was internalizing the idea that he needed to be better to deserve basic human dignity. He was 10 years old and already trying to fix himself to meet the approval of someone who would never approve, trying to earn love that should have been freely given. If I continued to accept my mother's treatment, if I continued to model this toxic dynamic, I would be teaching Leo that this was what family looked like. That people who claim to love you can throw you into the cold and call you trash, and you just work harder to please them. That your boundaries don't matter. That your pain is less important than keeping the peace. That abuse is acceptable as long as it comes from people who share your DNA. In 25 years, would Leo be sitting in his kitchen at 35 years old, finally realizing that his mother's passivity in the face of abuse had taught him to accept mistreatment as normal? Would he struggle to set boundaries with toxic people because I'd never shown him what healthy boundaries looked like? Would he sacrifice his own children's well-being to maintain relationships with people who didn't value him? The thought terrified me in a way that my mother's anger never had. I could handle being the scapegoat. I'd been doing it for decades, but I couldn't handle watching my son become one too. I couldn't stand by while the cycle I'd thought I'd escaped reached out and grabbed him anyway, pulling him into the same dysfunction that had shaped my entire life. My continued silence wasn't peacekeeping. It was harm. Every day I accepted my mother's treatment without consequence. I was teaching Leo that this was acceptable. That family could treat you worse than strangers, and you just absorbed it with grace. That love meant tolerating abuse. I held Leo for a long time there in the kitchen, with the pasta sauce burning on the stove and tears running down both our faces. When he finally pulled back and went to his room, I turned off the stove and just stood there shaking. I didn't have the luxury of passive acceptance anymore. I didn't get to keep my head down and hope things would eventually get better on their own. I had a responsibility to show my son what healthy boundaries looked like, even if I was learning them 20 years too late. I had to fight back, not for revenge, not even for justice really, but to break the cycle before it destroyed another generation. When David came home from work that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the estate planning folder open in front of me. I'd finally read through it during my lunch break, locked in my office where no one could see my hands shaking. What I'd found had confirmed my worst suspicions and given me the first weapon I'd ever had in this lifelong war. I looked up at my husband and said, "I need to find out what was in my father's will, because I don't think my mother ever told us the truth." David sat down across from me, took my hand, and said, "Then let's find out." David and I sat at the kitchen table late into that night, weighing options like we were planning a military campaign rather than dealing with family. The folder from my father's filing cabinet lay open between us, and what I'd found inside had been both illuminating and incomplete. There were notes about meetings with an attorney, references to estate planning discussions, and a business card for a lawyer named James Morrison with a handwritten note, "Final will March 2005. But there was no actual copy of the will itself, just evidence that one had existed. "You could just walk away," David said, not for the first time. He'd been saying it gently all evening, giving me permission to choose the easier path. "Block their numbers. Stop sending money. Cut them out of our lives completely. You don't owe them anything, Emma. Not after what they did to Leo, not after 35 years of using you." The idea was tempting in a way I hadn't expected. Just disappear from their lives. No confrontation, no drama, no exhausting legal battles or family showdowns. We could move on, build our life without the constant drain of my mother's demands and Lily's manufactured crises. We could take the $2,000 a month I'd been sending them and put it toward Leo's future instead. We could have peace. I imagined it, my phone silent, no more guilt-laden text messages about how I was abandoning family, no more panic calls about emergencies that always required money to solve. No more walking on eggshells trying to manage my mother's moods or prop up Lily's eternal helplessness. Just clean, simple distance. The idea should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like running away. "If I just disappear," I said slowly, working through my thoughts out loud. "What does Leo learn from that?" He learns that when someone hurts you, you run. He learns that bullies win. He learns that $60,000 and 3 years of support can vanish into nothing with no accountability, no consequences, no justice. David reached across the table and took my hand. He'd also learned that his mother values her own peace enough to walk away from toxicity. That's not a bad lesson. "Maybe," I said. "But the past would stay unaddressed. Whatever my father wanted, whatever provisions he made, whatever truth exists about that will, it would all stay buried. My mother would get to keep her version of events. The story would be that I abandoned my aging mother and helpless sister. And I'd have no proof otherwise, no evidence, nothing to show Leo when he's older and asks why we don't see his grandmother." There was another fear too, one I was almost ashamed to voice. Our community. I started, then stopped. David waited patiently. "You know how it is. Filial piety isn't just valued, it's expected. My mother goes to the Vietnamese church every Sunday. She knows everyone. She's already so good at playing the victim, at making people feel sorry for her. If I just cut her off with no explanation, no documentation, she'll tell everyone I abandoned her. That I'm a terrible daughter who turned her back on family." David squeezed my hand. "You care what those people think." "I shouldn't," I admitted. "But yes, I care what my aunts and uncles think. I care about the looks I'll get at family gatherings, the phone calls from distant cousins lecturing me about duty and respect. I care that Leo will grow up hearing whispers about how his mother is selfish, ungrateful, a disgrace to the family name. It shouldn't matter, but it does." This was the reality that women my age understood viscerally. You couldn't just walk away from family without social consequences, especially in tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone and reputation mattered. My mother knew exactly how to weaponize that. She'd paint herself as the abandoned elderly mother Lily, as the struggling single parent, and me as the cold, successful daughter who'd turned her back on them in their time of need. People would believe her because that's the narrative they'd expect, the dutiful, suffering mother versus the ungrateful modern daughter. "So what's the alternative?" David asked. "You confront them. You fight this out. Not impulsively." I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind as I spoke, not emotionally. "I do this right. I find out the truth about Dad's will. I document everything, every dollar I've sent, every request they've made, every promise they've broken. I build a case so solid that when they try to rewrite history, when they try to make me the villain, I have proof. I have evidence. I have the truth on my side." I pulled out my phone and started making notes, my accountant's brain kicking into gear. I need to track down that will. I need to find out if James Morrison is still alive, if his firm still has records. I need to pull all my bank statements showing the transfers, screenshot all the text messages asking for money, document everything. I need to create a paper trail that protects me when this inevitably gets ugly. David nodded slowly. This is going to be hard. Harder than just walking away. I know, I said. But walking away would be easier for me, not better for Leo. He needs to see that you can stand up to bullies even when they're family. He needs to learn that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their abuse, that you can honor your parents without dishonoring yourself. I thought about my father, about the man who'd told me he'd made sure I was taken care of, who'd apparently trusted an attorney with his final wishes instead of just trusting my mother to do right by us. Maybe he'd known. Maybe he'd seen the same favoritism, the same dysfunction, and tried to protect me from it the only way he could with legal documents and careful planning. This isn't about revenge, I said more to myself than to David. It's not even really about the money, though God knows I want that $60,000 back. It's about truth. It's about dignity. It's about teaching Leo that you can love someone and still set boundaries, that you can care about family and still demand to be treated with basic respect. David stood up, came around the table, and kissed the top of my head. Then let's find that will. Let's get the truth. And whatever you decide to do with it, I'm with you. The next morning, after I dropped Leo at school and before I headed to work, I sat in my car in the parking lot and made a phone call. I'd found a probate attorney through a recommendation from a colleague, a woman named Patricia Sterling, who specialized in estate disputes. When she answered, I took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. My name is Emma Carter. I need to track down my father's will from 2005, and I think my mother may have hidden it. Patricia Sterling's first advice was simple and strategic. Don't let them know you're investigating. The minute they suspect you're looking into the will, they'll start destroying evidence or building their own defense. You need time to gather information without raising red flags. So 3 days after Christmas, I did something that went against every honest instinct I had. I called my mother and apologized. I practiced the words beforehand, standing in my bathroom with the door locked so David and Leo wouldn't hear me rehearsing. The apology needed to sound genuine enough to be believed, vague enough to avoid actually admitting fault, and submissive enough to make my mother feel she'd won. When I finally made the call, my heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady and contrite. Mom, I'm sorry for how I reacted on Christmas. I was stressed from work and I overreacted by taking Leo away so quickly. I should have stayed and talked it through. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear my mother's brain processing this, deciding how to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice had that martyred quality she always used when she wanted to be gracious while still making sure you knew how deeply you'd wounded her. Well, I appreciate you calling Emma. You really hurt us, you know. Lily has been devastated. She cried for 2 days. You made such a scene, and on Christmas of all days. We were just trying to have a nice family holiday, and Leo was being disruptive. Children need discipline, and you've always been too sensitive about that. Your father spoiled you, and you've never learned that sometimes correction is necessary. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood and forced myself to say, You're right. I should have handled it better. Yes, well. She was warming up now, launching into a familiar lecture about my deficiencies as a parent, as a daughter, as a person. I let her talk, murmuring agreement at appropriate intervals, letting her believe I was properly chastened. This was the old Emma, the one who absorbed criticism without protest, who shouldered blame to keep the peace. But then Lily's voice cut through the background. Can I talk to her mom? There was rustling, and suddenly Lily was on the line, her tone sharp in a way I wasn't used to hearing from her. What made you change your mind, Emma? The question caught me off guard. It was too direct, too probing. Lily usually played the helpless younger sister, letting our mother do all the confronting. But there was nothing helpless in that question. It was the question of someone who didn't quite believe what I was selling. I just had time to think about it, I said carefully. And I realized I was being unfair. Lily said, and the sound was loaded with skepticism. Then she handed the phone back to our mother, and the conversation wrapped up with Margaret's usual reminders about family obligations and how I needed to do better. I agreed to everything, hung up, and sat there feeling dirty, like I'd betrayed something fundamental in myself by playing this game. But Patricia had been clear: if I wanted to investigate without interference, I needed them to think nothing had changed. So I kept up the charade. In January, I sent my usual $2,000. But in February, I sent only $1,700 with a text explaining that David's car had needed unexpected repairs. In March, I sent $1,500 citing Leo's upcoming orthodontic work. Each time I provided just enough detail to make the excuse plausible without inviting questions. Margaret complained mildly, "Things are tight here too, you know," but she still accepted the money. What surprised me was Lily's response. In early April, I got a text from her that made my blood run cold. "You sent Juan $500 last month, but Juan $700 the month before. Is everything okay financially?" The message was phrased as concern, but I could read between the lines. Lily had been tracking every payment, documenting every amount. She knew exactly how much I'd sent each month for years, had probably been keeping records the whole time. This wasn't casual awareness. This was systematic monitoring. Emma realized Lily had been preparing for something, building a case of her own, though for what purpose I couldn't yet say. I responded with reassurances about our finances being fine, just some temporary increased expenses, and went back to sending $2,000 the next month. But internally, I was recalibrating everything I thought I knew about my sister. She wasn't the passive, helpless victim she'd always portrayed herself as. She was watching, tracking, documenting. She was playing a longer game than I'd realized. If Lily was building evidence, I needed to build better evidence. I started taking screenshots of every text message that asked for money, every guilt trip, every manipulation. I went through my bank records and created a spreadsheet documenting every transfer I'd made over the past 3 years with dates, amounts, and any accompanying messages. Washington was a one-party consent state for recording, so I started recording our phone calls, saving the audio files in a password-protected folder on my laptop. I also went through storage, pulling out boxes of old family documents I'd rescued over the years when my mother had threatened to throw them away. Tax returns from when my father was alive, insurance policies, random papers from his desk that I'd saved sentimentally but never really examined. I was looking for anything that might mention the will, any clue about his intentions. In a box labeled Dad's Office, buried under bank statements from 2004, I found it. An envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. The postmark was from July 2005, 3 weeks before he died. The envelope had never been opened, the seal still intact. But on the back, in my mother's distinctive loopy cursive, was a note that made my stomach drop: "Do not give to Emma." My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the letter. This envelope had been in my mother's possession at some point. She'd written that note, made the deliberate decision to keep this letter from me. For 20 years, whatever my father had written to me had been hidden, denied, erased from existence, as if he'd never wanted me to have it. I carried the letter to my home office, set it on the desk under the lamp, and just stared at it. It was after midnight. David and Leo were asleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and my own ragged breathing. The envelope sat there, 20 years of secrets sealed inside paper that had yellowed slightly with age. Once I opened it, there would be no going back to ignorant peace. Whatever was inside would change things, would arm me with knowledge I couldn't unknow. But did I have the courage to break that seal? To face whatever truth my father had tried to tell me from beyond the grave? My hand reached for the letter opener in my desk drawer. I slid the letter opener under the sealed flap, the paper tearing with a soft ripping sound that seemed too loud in the quiet office. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the single sheet of paper folded in thirds, the edges slightly brittle with age. My father's handwriting covered the page shakier than I remembered it. He'd been sick when he wrote this, the cancer already stealing his strength. But the words were clear, and as I read them, my entire understanding of the past 20 years began to unravel. "Emma, my dear daughter," it began, and I could hear his voice in my head, gentle and steady. "If you're reading this, It means your mother chose not to give this to you when she was supposed to on your 18th birthday. I'm writing to tell you that I've made arrangements in my will to ensure you're taken care of. The house will be divided 50% to you, 30% to Lily, and 20% to your mother. I'm doing this not because I love you more, but because I know you'll be the one who holds the family together without using it as a weapon. Your mother disagrees with this division. She thinks everything should go to her to distribute fairly, but I know her idea of fair has always meant whatever keeps Lily dependent and you obligated. I had to stop reading for a moment, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound that would wake the house. 50%. He'd left me 50% of the house. Not because I was his favorite, but because he trusted me. Because he saw what I'd never been able to name, that my mother's version of fairness was actually a system of control. The letter continued. I love your mother, Emma, but I see how she treats you versus Lily, and it's not right. You deserve better than to spend your life being compared and found wanting just for being competent. The attorney handling my estate is James Morrison at Morrison & Associates. He has the original will. Trust your strength, Emma. You're more like me than you know, and that's exactly why your mother finds you threatening. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Don't let anyone make you forget your worth. Love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face before I could fully process what it meant. My father had seen it. He'd seen the favoritism, the unfair comparisons, the way my mother kept Lily helpless while demanding I be strong. And he'd tried to protect me the only way he knew how, with legal documents that ensured I'd be taken care of after he was gone. He'd tried to give me security, independence, the foundation to build a life without being trapped in my mother's web of obligation, but I'd never received any of it. The will he'd carefully prepared had disappeared, and with it the protection he'd tried to give me. I grabbed my laptop and searched for James Morrison. The law office's website was archived. The practice had closed in 2019 when Morrison retired at 80. I kept digging my accountant's brain following the digital trail until I found his obituary from 2023. James Morrison had passed away at 84, survived by his wife and 2 daughters. The obituary mentioned that his practice's files had been transferred to Burton & Associates for record-keeping and client access. I barely slept that night. The moment business hours started, I was on the phone with Burton & Associates, my heart hammering as I explained the situation to the paralegal who answered. I need to access estate files from 2005. My father was Robert Carter and James Morrison handled his will. I could hear keyboard clicking on the other end. Let me search our archived files, the paralegal said. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I'm sorry, Ms. Carter, but I'm not finding any file for Carter Estate 2005 in our system. Are you sure James Morrison handled it? I'm sure, I said, my voice tight. I have a letter from my father referencing it. More clicking. I see files for Morrison's clients from that period, but there's nothing under Carter. It's possible the file was never transferred, or it could have been closed and archived elsewhere. You might need to check with the probate court directly. But I already knew what had happened. My mother had made the will disappear. Either she'd convinced Morrison somehow to destroy it, or more likely she'd simply never filed it with probate court. She'd gone to court, claiming my father died intestate without a will, and let the default laws apply. In Washington state, that would have meant she got 50% as the surviving spouse, and Lily and I split the remaining 50%. My mother had received 50% instead of the 20% my father intended. Lily got 25% instead of 30%, and I'd gotten 25% instead of 50%. My mother had stolen from me. From all of us, really, but mostly from me. She'd taken what my father had meant for me and redistributed it according to her own sense of what was fair, and she'd done it deliberately with full knowledge of what she was taking. Sitting there in my office, staring at my father's letter, I finally understood the full depth of my mother's resentment. She hadn't favored Lily out of simple maternal preference or because Lily needed more help. She'd favored Lily and punished me as retaliation. My father had given me more in his will because he trusted me, respected me, saw my strength. And that proof of his regard, that validation I'd been desperate for my entire childhood, had been something my mother couldn't tolerate. She'd spent 20 years making me pay for being my father's daughter. Every comparison to Lily, every minimization of my achievements, every demand for sacrifice had been Margaret's way of evening the score. If my father thought I was strong and capable, my mother would make me prove it by carrying impossible burdens. If he'd wanted to protect me financially, she'd make sure I spent my life protecting everyone else instead. If he'd loved me openly in a way he apparently hadn't loved her, and I was beginning to suspect their marriage had been far more troubled than I'd realized she would make certain I never felt loved again. The favoritism toward Lily wasn't about Lily at all. It was about punishing me for being the chosen one in my father's eyes, even though I'd never known it. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn my mother's approval, never understanding that the game was rigged from the start. She would never approve of me because my very existence reminded her that her husband had trusted me more than he'd trusted her. I was reaching for my phone to call Patricia Sterling when it rang in my hand, making me jump. Lily's name flashed on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, but that would raise suspicion. I needed to stay in character, be the compliant Emma. I answered on the third ring. "Emma," Lily said without preamble, her voice carrying a tension I wasn't used to hearing from her. "Mom noticed you went through some old boxes at the house last month when you dropped off Leo's presents. What were you looking for?" My blood went cold. I hadn't realized my mother had been watching, cataloging, noticing. The boxes I'd quickly searched while Leo used the bathroom, hoping to find documents about the house or my father's affairs she'd seen. And now Lily was calling to find out why. I forced my voice to stay casual. "Just some old photos. I thought maybe Dad had some pictures from when we were kids that I could frame for Leo." "Did you find anything?" The question was sharp, probing. "No," I lied. "Just old bills and stuff. Nothing interesting." There was a pause. "Okay," Lily said finally, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. "Just wondering." She hung up and I sat there staring at my phone, my father's letter still in my other hand. They were watching me. They were suspicious. And I'd just lied about what I was looking for, which meant if they found out the truth, they'd know I'd been sneaking around. The game had just gotten much more dangerous. That phone call from Lily changed everything. Her question about what I'd been looking for in those boxes hadn't been casual concern. It had been reconnaissance. She was checking to see if I'd found something, if I knew something. And the sharpness in her voice, the directness I wasn't used to hearing from my supposedly helpless little sister, made me realize I'd been fundamentally misunderstanding who Lily was. I called Patricia Sterling the next morning and told her about the call. "I need to know what I'm actually dealing with here," I said. "I've been treating Lily like she's just my mother's passive accomplice, but I think she might be more active in this than I realized." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said, "If you're serious about pursuing the will issue, you need to know what you're up against. I can recommend a private investigator. He's discreet, thorough, and he specializes in family asset disputes. It's an expense, but if your sister is planning something, you need to know what it is before you make your move." The investigator's name was Marcus Chen, and he looked nothing like what I'd expected. I'd imagined someone out of a detective novel, rumpled coat, 5 o'clock shadow, cynical demeanor. Instead, Marcus was a neat, methodical man in his 50s who took pages of notes and asked precise questions about Lily's habits, schedule, and known associates. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "I'll find out who your sister really is." What he found shocked me to my core. Lily had a job. Not just any job, but a steady part-time position as a bookkeeper for a small property management company, working 25 hours a week at $18 an hour. She'd been there for almost 3 years, the same amount of time I'd been sending $2,000 a month to support her and my mother. Marcus had her pay stubs. She was making about $1,900 a month, enough to cover her basic expenses and then some. My mother didn't know about the job. Marcus had watched Lily leave for work 3 mornings in a row, always telling Margaret she was going to the library or meeting a friend. She'd been hiding her income to avoid pressure to contribute to household bills, letting me fund her life while she pocketed her own earnings. But that wasn't the worst of it. Marcus had also discovered that Lily had been in a relationship for 2 years with a man named Richard Sutton, 53 years old, married with 2 teenage children. He was a commercial real estate developer, wealthy, and from what Marcus could determine from financial transactions, he'd been giving Lily regular gifts deposits of $500 to $1,000 showing up in her account monthly, labeled as transfers from an LLC Richard controlled. It was a sugar daddy arrangement essentially, though Marcus was careful to phrase it more diplomatically in his report. I sat in my car reading Marcus's findings, feeling sick. The narrative I'd believed my entire adult life, poor Lily, struggling Lily, helpless Lily, who couldn't make it on her own, was a lie. She'd been perfectly capable of supporting herself. She had income. She had additional financial support from her relationship. The constant crisis calls about needing money for groceries, for utilities, for her kids' school supplies, had been partially fabricated. She'd been taking my money while having her own resources playing poor to keep the cash flowing. But Marcus had found something even more disturbing in the digital trail he'd uncovered through legal database searches and public records. In early 2023, Lily had sent multiple emails to a real estate attorney named Donald Pierce, asking very specific questions. If someone has been financially supporting a property owner for years but has no legal claim to the property, can they force a sale or claim ownership? If the property owner becomes incapacitated or dies, how does ownership transfer if other family members have been providing financial support? She'd been researching how to cut me out, how to take the house entirely despite everything I'd paid. The emails got worse. There were inquiries about financial elder abuse claims, specifically asking whether someone could argue that a family member was exploiting an elderly parent by forcing money on them and then claiming they were owed something in return. Lily had been preparing to flip the script entirely to paint me as the abuser for the very generosity she'd been soliciting. This wasn't opportunistic cruelty or desperate scrambling. This was strategic long-term planning. Lily had been playing a chess game I didn't even know I was part of, thinking moves ahead while I'd assumed we were on the same team. I wanted to hate her purely cleanly, with no complications. But then I got to the last section of Marcus's report, and everything got messy again. Medical bills. Dozens of them from Swedish Medical Center, from oncology specialists, from radiation treatment facilities. Lily had been diagnosed with thyroid cancer 8 months ago, stage 2, treatable but requiring surgery, radiation, and ongoing monitoring. Even with insurance, the bills were staggering. Over $40,000 in out-of-pocket costs, and she'd only paid about $12,000 so far. The rest had gone to a medical debt consolidation company called Health Bridge Financial Solutions. Marcus had flagged them in his report as a predatory lender known for targeting cancer patients with high-interest loans. Lily's loan was for $32,000 at 23% annual interest. The monthly payments were eating her alive. Suddenly, some of the money requests made terrible sense. She hadn't been lying about needing help, she just hadn't been honest about why. Instead of coming to me and saying, "I have cancer, I'm scared I need help with medical bills," she'd chosen to manipulate, to scheme, to research legal strategies, to take everything. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building, the investigator's report on my lap, feeling a complicated knot of emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger at being lied to and used. Fury at the calculated legal maneuvering. But also pity because I could imagine how terrified Lily must be. Cancer at 32, single, with 3 kids, drowning in debt, using the only tools she'd ever learned, playing helpless, manipulating sympathy, taking advantage of others. Our mother had raised her to be this way, had taught her that being weak got you taken care of, that manipulation was survival, that you didn't have to be honest or competent as long as you could make people feel sorry for you. And now Lily was dying inside, literally sick and financially desperate, and still she couldn't bring herself to just ask for help honestly. She had to scheme, had to plot, had to try to steal what I might have freely given if only she'd asked. I realized with cold clarity that I wasn't fighting a weak, coddled little sister who needed my protection. I was up against someone who'd been quietly preparing for war for years, someone who'd researched how to destroy me legally while smiling to my face, Someone whose desperation made her willing to do anything to survive. And desperate people were dangerous. I was still processing Marcus's report, still trying to reconcile the Lily I'd thought I knew with the Lily who'd been researching how to legally destroy me, when my mother called 2 days later with a proposition that would have sounded generous if I hadn't already known it was a trap. "Emma, honey, I've been thinking." She began, her voice warm in that calculated way that always preceded a request. "You've done so much for this family, for this house. Your father would have wanted you to have a real stake in it. After all you've contributed, it's only right. I want to make it official. I want to add your name to the deed so you're a co-owner." A month ago, I would have been grateful. Thrilled even. This was what I'd secretly hoped for when I'd paid off the mortgage acknowledgement security, a formal recognition that I belonged. But now, with Marcus's findings fresh in my mind and my father's letter still hidden in my desk drawer, I heard the offer for what it was. Not generosity. Bait. "That's very thoughtful, Mom," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "I'd need to see the paperwork, of course. Talk it over with David." Of course. I've already spoken to a real estate attorney. He's drawing up the documents now. I'll send them to you as soon as they're ready. I just wanted you to know that I see everything you've done, Emma. I appreciate you." The words should have warmed me. Instead, they made my skin crawl because I knew they were lies designed to make me lower my guard. The paperwork arrived 3 days later via email. I printed it out at work, closed my office door, and read through it with the same attention I gave to audit reports. My accountant training had taught me to look for what wasn't being said, to find the hidden clauses, to understand the real implications beneath the legal language. And there it was, buried in the 3rd page in dense legalese. By signing this document and accepting co-ownership of the property, I would be accepting joint and several liability for any and all debts currently secured against said property, including but not limited to the existing home equity line of credit. I went very still. Home equity line of credit. I'd paid off the mortgage in 2022. There shouldn't be any debt against the house. I read the clause 3 more times to make sure I understood it correctly. If I signed this, I would be personally responsible for debts. I hadn't incurred debts I didn't even know existed. I called Margaret back, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Mom, I'd love to move forward with this, but I need to review it with David and our financial advisor first. Also, can you send me the full history of liens and debts on the property? I just want to make sure I understand everything before we proceed." It was a reasonable request, a normal request, the kind of due diligence any responsible adult would do before signing a legal document that transferred property ownership. But Lily's voice suddenly cut through the background, sharp and hostile. "Can I talk to her, Mom?" There was fumbling, and then Lily was on the line, her tone nothing like the helpless little sister act she usually performed. "Why do you need to make everything so complicated? Emma, Mom is trying to do something nice for you, and you're acting like we're trying to scam you." The accusation was so absurd, coming from someone who'd literally been researching how to legally scam me, that I almost laughed. Instead, I said calmly, "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just want to review the documents properly. This is a major legal transaction. This is family, not a business deal. God, you're so paranoid. Mom is finally acknowledging everything you've done, and you can't just accept it gracefully. You have to turn it into some big production." "Lily," I said quietly, "why do you even care? This is between me and Mom." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her scrambling. "Because I want this family to Mom wants us to be unified. She's trying to bring us together, and you're making it difficult like you always do." The slip was tiny, but telling. She'd started to say what she really meant, "I want," before catching herself and deflecting to what Mom wanted. This wasn't Margaret's plan alone. They were coordinating, probably had been for months. I told them I'd review the paperwork and get back to them, then immediately called Patricia Sterling and asked her to recommend a title company that could do a rush search on my mother's property. I needed to know what debts existed against that house. The results came back 48 hours later, and they were worse than I'd imagined. Margaret had taken out a home equity line of credit for $85,000 in October 2022, just 6 months after I'd paid off the original mortgage with my inheritance. The HELOC had been drawn down to its full limit, and according to the payment history, Margaret had missed the last 6 months of payments. The balance owed was $78,000, and the bank had sent a notice of default. They were 60 days away from starting foreclosure proceedings. But where had the money gone I'd been paying for all the repairs on the house for the past 3 years, the new water heater, the roof, patching the electrical work? If Margaret had taken out $85,000 for home improvements, there should be evidence of major renovations. There wasn't. Marcus, bless him, had already been tracking this. His follow-up report showed the money trail. Approximately $50,000 had gone to paying off Lily's medical debt and credit cards in late 2022. $20,000 had been funneled into something called Serenity Wellness Solutions, which turned out to be a failed multi-level marketing venture my mother had started selling essential oils. The remaining $15,000 was harder to trace, but Marcus suspected it had been spent on general living expenses and Lily's needs over the months following. They'd mortgaged the house I'd saved to fund Lily's life and my mother's pipe dreams. And now they were desperate because they couldn't make the payments the bank was threatening foreclosure, and they needed either someone with excellent credit to co-sign a refinancing, or they needed someone to write another check to save them. That someone was me. If I signed the co-ownership papers, I'd be legally liable for that $78,000 debt. They could refinance with me as a co-borrower using my perfect credit to secure new terms, and I'd be stuck making payments on debt I never agreed to. If I didn't sign and didn't pay, the house would go into foreclosure within 90 days and they'd lose everything. They'd designed a perfect trap. Either I became financially responsible for their mistakes, or I was the daughter who let the family home be taken by the bank. I sat in my office staring at the title report, feeling that cold clarity settle over me again. This was it. This was the moment where I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be. The old Emma would have signed, would have taken on the debt, sacrificed her financial security, enabled the dysfunction for another round. The old Emma would have been so afraid of being seen as selfish or unloving that she'd have destroyed herself to prove otherwise. But I wasn't the old Emma anymore. I picked up my phone and called my mother. When she answered, her voice was eager, hopeful. "Emma, have you had a chance to review the paperwork?" "I have," I said, "and I'll sign it. But I have one condition." My mother's voice brightened immediately. "Oh, wonderful, Emma. I knew you'd understand. Family has to stick together. Let me get the paperwork finalized and we can sign next week." "Mom," I interrupted gently, "you didn't let me finish. I said I have a condition." There was a pause. What kind of condition? I took a breath, centering myself. If I'm going to be legally responsible for the debt on this property, $78,000, that I didn't know existed until 2 days ago, then I need to have actual control over the asset. I'll have my attorney draft an addendum to the co-ownership agreement that gives me decision-making authority over the house. That includes who lives there, what financial obligations we take on, whether we refinance or sell, all major decisions. Essentially, if I'm liable for the debt, I need to be in charge of the asset. The silence on the other end was profound. I could hear my mother's breathing, quick and shallow. Then Lily's voice in the background, sharp and urgent. "Put her on speaker." A click, and suddenly I could hear both of them clearly. Lily spoke first, her tone no longer even pretending to be sweet. "That seems extreme, Emma. Mom is trying to do something nice for you, and you want to take over the entire house." "I'm not taking over anything," I said calmly, my years of professional experience keeping my voice level even as my heart hammered. "I'm asking for partnership. Real partnership. Partnership means shared risk and shared control. If I'm going to be responsible for a $78,000 debt, I need authority over how that house is managed. That's not extreme, that's basic financial common sense." Margaret finally found her voice. "I thought we were talking about adding you to the deed, not you taking over. This is still my house, Emma. I've lived here for 30 years. Then you should have thought of that before taking out a massive loan against it and defaulting on the payments," I said, and the bluntness of my words shocked even me. The old Emma would never have spoken to her mother this way. "Mom, I'm offering you a solution. You need someone to take responsibility for this debt, or you lose the house in 90 days. I'm willing to do that, but not without having control over the decisions that affect my financial liability. What exactly are you offering me in return for taking on your debt?" The silence stretched so long I thought they might have hung up. Then Margaret said, her voice tight, "This isn't how family works, Emma. You don't put conditions on helping family. You put conditions on giving me co-ownership," I countered. "You embedded a $78,000 debt obligation in the paperwork without telling me up front. You wanted me to sign without reading it carefully. That's not how family works either." I heard whispered conversation on their end, urgent and heated, but too quiet for me to make out the words. Then Margaret came back on, and I could hear Lily coaching her in the background. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong." My mother said, her tone shifting to something more conciliatory. "Maybe we should just sell the house and divide the proceeds. That way, everyone gets their fair share, and we can all move on with our lives. No debt, no complications, just a clean split." It was a good pivot, I had to admit. Frame it as the fair solution, the generous compromise. They were betting I'd reject it out of sentimentality, that I'd be unwilling to let go of my childhood home, the house Dad built all those memories. That my emotional attachment would make me vulnerable to being manipulated back into the original trap. They'd badly miscalculated. "That sounds reasonable," I said, and I could hear their sharp intake of breath. They hadn't expected agreement. "Let's sell the house. Sell the yawn. But first I need to see Dad's will to understand what the proper division of proceeds should be." The temperature seemed to drop even through the phone line. Margaret's voice went very careful. "Emma, your father died 20 years ago. Whatever arrangements he made then don't really apply now." "Actually, wills don't expire," I said pleasantly. "If Dad left a valid will, it establishes his intentions for the distribution of his estate, including the house. I'd like to see it before we discuss how to divide anything." Lily exploded. I actually heard the sound of her hand slapping something, probably the table. "The will doesn't matter anymore. It's been 20 years. It's not legally enforceable now." I went very still, my entire body tensing like a predator that's just spotted prey. "Lily," I said quietly, "how do you know the will is 20 years old?" "What?" She sounded confused, defensive. "I never mentioned when Dad died in this conversation. I just said I wanted to see his will. But you just told me it's 20 years old and not enforceable, which means you know when it was written, which means you've seen it." Lily made a strangled sound. Margaret jumped in quickly. "Don't be ridiculous, Emma. We all know when your father died. Of course we know it's been 20 years. "Mom," I said, my voice still eerily calm. "I didn't say when Dad died. I said I wanted to see his will to understand the proper division of the house." Lily's response was that the will doesn't matter because it's 20 years old and not enforceable. That's a very specific legal argument. The only way she'd know to make that argument is if she's seen the will and knows what it says. The silence was absolute. I could picture them looking at each other, realizing the mistake, trying to figure out how to backtrack. I didn't give them the chance. "You both know the will exists. You know what it says. And you've been hiding it from me for 20 years. That's fraud, Mom. That's actual legal fraud in the probate process." "Emma, you're being—" Margaret started, but I cut her off. "I'm done with this conversation. I'll be in touch through my attorney. Don't contact me directly anymore." "Emma, wait." Lily's voice was panicked now. The mask completely dropped, but I hung up. I sat there for a moment, my hand still on the phone, my whole body shaking with adrenaline. I'd just burned the bridge. There was no going back to the pretense of family harmony, no more playing the dutiful daughter. I'd called them out directly, accused them of fraud to their faces, and cut off contact. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I gathered my papers, the co-ownership documents they'd sent, the title search results, Marcus's investigation report, my father's letter, and put them all in a folder. Then I sat down at my computer and sent an email to Patricia Sterling with the subject line, "Ready to file." In the body, I wrote, "They tried to trap me with the co-ownership papers. When I demanded control in exchange for liability, they pivoted to suggesting we sell." When I asked to see the will, Lily slipped and revealed they've known about it all along. I have them on record admitting knowledge of the will. What's our next move? Patricia's response came 30 minutes later. "Come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring everything you have. It's time to take this to probate court." I closed my laptop and just sat there in the quiet of my office. Somewhere across town, my mother and sister were probably panicking, trying to figure out how much I knew and what I was planning to do. They were realizing maybe for the first time that I wasn't the compliant Emma who'd always backed down before. They were about to find out exactly how much I'd changed. I should have expected the counterattack, but I didn't anticipate how fast or how vicious it would be. 48 hours after I hung up on my mother and sister, my phone started blowing up with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins, family friends, members of the Vietnamese church my mother attended every Sunday. The messages ranged from concerned to openly hostile, but they all had the same theme. What was wrong with me? How could I do this to my poor mother? Didn't I have any shame? I didn't understand what was happening until my Aunt Lynn called, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Emma, I just saw your mother's Facebook post. I can't believe you would treat her this way, after everything she's done for you." I pulled up Facebook on my laptop with shaking hands. My mother's post was at the top of my feed, already shared 47 times. The photo showed her looking small and frail in her living room, her face aged and sad. The text was a masterpiece of manipulation. "My heart is breaking tonight. After 73 years of putting my family first, I'm facing homelessness because my daughter wants to take the house her father built. I raised Emma to be strong and independent, maybe too well because now she's forgotten where she came from. She's threatening legal action against me, her own mother trying to force me out of my home. Her sister Lily is battling cancer and needs family support. But Emma says we're a burden. I don't understand what I did wrong. I just wanted to keep our family together. Please pray for us." The comments were already pouring in. "This is so sad. Some children have no respect. Money changes people. Your daughter should be ashamed." Every comment was a knife. But what made it worse was that I could see Lily's reply pinned at the top by my mother. She'd written a long comment and attached a video. I clicked on the video with a sense of dread. Lily's face filled the screen, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice shaking. I didn't want to talk about this publicly, but I think people deserve to know the truth. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer 8 months ago. I've been trying to stay positive, trying not to burden the family. But treatment is expensive, and I'm struggling. When Mom tried to help me, Emma accused us of stealing from her. She's threatening to take the house to kick us out, all because she wants to punish us. I never asked to get sick. I never asked for help. But now my own sister is using my illness as an excuse to take everything. I'm scared. I don't know what we're going to do. The video had been viewed over 200 times already. The comments on it were even worse than on my mother's post. People I'd known my whole life were calling me heartless, greedy, a disgrace to my parents' memory. My phone kept buzzing. Text messages from relatives I barely knew, all lecturing me about filial duty and family loyalty. Someone from the temple called to tell me I was no longer welcome at community events. A cousin I'd played with as a child sent me a message saying her mother had always known I was selfish, and this just proved it. I sat there watching the post get shared, and shared watching the narrative spread like poison through the community. My mother had spent 30 years building relationships in that temple, being the devoted widow, the struggling mother. Everyone loved her. Everyone pitied her. And now she'd weaponized all that goodwill against me. I could handle it. I'd built a life outside this community. I had friends who knew the real me. I could survive being the villain in their story. But then Leo came home from school and everything fell apart. He walked through the door with his backpack dragging on the floor, his face blotchy from crying. I knew immediately something was wrong. Leo baby, what happened? He dropped his backpack and looked at me with such confusion and hurt that it broke my heart. Is it true? Are you really being mean to Grandma? Are you going to make her homeless? I knelt down in front of him. Who told you that? Tyler Chen. His mom saw something on Facebook about how you're trying to steal Grandma's house and you don't care that Aunt Lily is sick. Tyler asked me if it was true and I said I didn't know, and then other kids started asking too, and everyone was looking at me weird. His voice cracked. Mom, I don't understand. Why is everyone saying bad things about you? Did you really do those things? I tried to explain. I tried to tell him about the money I'd given, about the house I'd saved, about Grandma not being completely honest. But how do you explain financial abuse to a 10-year-old? How do you tell your child that his grandmother is lying without making him feel like he has to choose sides? How do you make him understand that sometimes family can hurt you deeply while still claiming to love you? Leo listened, his face scrunched up in concentration, trying to understand adult problems that he shouldn't have to think about. When I finished, he asked in a small voice, So Grandma is lying. Grandma is telling her version of the truth, I said carefully. But she's leaving out important parts. Like what? Like the $60,000 I gave her to save the house. Like the $2,000 I've sent every month for 3 years. Like the fact that she and Aunt Lily have been keeping secrets from me. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I wish everyone would just stop fighting. Me too, baby. Me too. That night, after Leo was in bed, I sat in the darkness of my living room and seriously considered giving up. Just apologizing, paying off the debt, signing whatever papers they wanted, anything to make this stop. Anything to protect Leo from being caught in the crossfire. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe family was supposed to be more important than money or justice or my own dignity. I was reaching for my phone to call my mother and surrender when my email notification chimed. The sender was a name I barely recognized, Marcus Sullivan, Lily's ex-husband, the man she'd divorced 3 years ago and never let meet the extended family. The subject line read, You deserve to know the truth. I opened it with shaking hands. The email was brief, almost businesslike. Emma, I heard about what's happening through mutual friends. I'm not surprised. When I was married to Lily, I saw how she and your mother operated. Lily isn't the helpless victim she pretends to be. I have text messages and emails from when we were married that show her planning how to extract money from your mother by playing sick or exaggerating problems. She did the same thing to me constantly, creating crises that required financial rescue, then getting angry when I asked questions about where the money was going. I'm attaching some examples. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing this because I think you deserve to know who you're really dealing with. If you need me to testify to any of this, I'm willing. She shouldn't get away with this again. Marcus. Attached were screenshots, text messages where Lily discussed with a friend how to work Mom for more money by crying about the kids' needs. Emails where she'd asked Marcus for money for emergency medical bills that turned out to be shopping sprees. A pattern of manipulation going back years documented in black and white. I stared at the email for a long time. This was my choice point. I could delete this call my mother surrendered to their narrative and buy peace at the cost of my dignity. Or I could fight back with the truth, knowing it would get uglier before it got better, knowing Leo might suffer more before this was over. But if I gave up now, what was I teaching my son? That bullies win if they're loud enough, that lies triumph if they're popular enough, that you should sacrifice your truth to avoid conflict. I forwarded Marcus's email to Patricia Sterling with a single line, I'm ready to fight. The next 3 days were the worst of my life. Marcus's evidence should have made me feel stronger, more justified, more certain. Instead, the smear campaign intensified. More relatives called to berate me. The temple community formally asked me not to attend services anymore because my presence was upsetting to my mother. Someone left a note on my car at work calling me a disgrace to my ancestors. But the breaking point came on Thursday afternoon. I got a call from Leo's school. The vice principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked if I could come in for a quick meeting. When I arrived, she led me into her office with a sympathetic expression that made my stomach drop. Mrs. Carter Leo got into a physical altercation today. He pushed another student, Tyler Chen, during lunch. My son had never been in a fight in his life. What happened? According to witnesses, Tyler was talking about your family situation, something about your mother and some Facebook posts. Leo asked him to stop, but Tyler kept going. Then Leo shoved him hard enough that Tyler fell and scraped his knee. Leo's not in serious trouble. We understand there are extenuating circumstances, but we wanted you to be aware. I sat in that office chair feeling like the worst mother in the world. My fight with my own family had pushed my gentle, quiet son to violence. What was I doing? I couldn't face going home right away after I picked up Leo from school. I told him I needed to make a quick stop, and I drove to a parking lot near the waterfront and just sat there while Leo played a game on his phone in the back seat. The gray Seattle sky pressed down on me like a weight. I was losing everything. My community, my family relationships, my son's innocence, and for what? Money, a house. The satisfaction of proving I was right. None of it seemed worth the cost anymore. Half my extended family had stopped speaking to me. The aunts and uncles who'd known me since I was born now believed I was trying to steal from my elderly mother. David was supportive, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time he looked at me. Leo was suffering first, thrown out into the cold by his grandmother, now fighting at school because kids were repeating their parents' gossip. My mother's narrative had won. In the court of public opinion, I was the villain. Maybe I should just stop, apologize publicly, write a check for whatever they needed, accept being cast as the ungrateful daughter if it meant protecting Leo from more hurt. What did it matter who was right or wrong if my son was being destroyed in the crossfire? I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Sterling. When she answered, I said without preamble, "I think I want to drop everything and just walk away." There was a pause. "Emma, are you sure we have documentation now? We have Marcus's testimony. We're so close to—" "I don't care." I interrupted, my voice breaking. "My son got in a fight at school today because of this. The entire community thinks I'm a monster. I just want it to stop. I'll pay off their debt. I'll give them whatever they want. I just can't do this anymore." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Take the weekend. Don't make any decisions when you're this upset. We'll talk Monday." I agreed and hung up. I drove Leo home in silence, made dinner mechanically, and went through the motions of our evening routine like a robot. After Leo was in bed, I sat down with David and told him I was done. I couldn't fight anymore. David listened to me talk, watched me cry, and then asked a question I wasn't expecting. If you could go back in time and tell your 15-year-old self, the girl whose father just died and whose mother immediately put the world on her shoulders, what happened in this fight? What would you want to tell her? That you finally stood up for yourself and fought for the truth? Or that when it got hard, you backed down and let them win again? I started crying harder, but these tears felt different. Not defeated. Something closer to recognition. Your whole life, David continued softly, you've been backing down to keep the peace. And every single time you backed down, they pushed further. They pushed until they were throwing your son out in the cold and calling him trash. At what point does keeping the peace become participating in your own abuse? He was right. I'd spent 35 years surrendering bits of myself to avoid conflict, giving up my coat, my money, my boundaries, my dignity. And it had never been enough. Every sacrifice just taught them they could demand more. Every time I backed down to keep the peace, the price for that peace went up. "This isn't about proving you're right," David said. "It's not about the money or the house. It's about showing Leo what you do when someone treats you badly. What do we want him to learn? That family can abuse you and you just take it. that keeping peace is more important than keeping your soul, or that you can love people and still say no to their mistreatment. I looked toward Leo's bedroom door. My sweet boy who was learning to use his fists because he'd watched his mother absorb abuse for years and didn't know any other way to handle injustice. If I gave up now, what was I teaching him? That bullies win if they're loud enough, that lies triumph if enough people believe them, that you should set yourself on fire to keep others warm. If I backed down now, Leo would learn that the path of least resistance was always the right path, even when it led over your own dignity. He'd learn that love meant tolerating abuse, that family could treat you worse than strangers, and you'd just keep coming back for more. In 25 years, he'd be sitting in his own car wondering why he couldn't set boundaries, why he attracted users and takers, why he felt empty despite doing everything everyone asked of him. This fight wasn't about me anymore. It was about breaking the cycle before it broke my son. I thought about my father's letter, about how he'd tried to protect me with legal documents and careful planning, about how he'd known that my mother's version of love was poisonous and tried to give me the resources to escape it. He'd done his part. Now I had to do mine. I wiped my eyes and looked at David. "You're right. I'm not dropping this. I'm going to see it through." That night, I emailed Patricia. "Disregard my earlier call. I'm not dropping anything. In fact, I need you to file a petition to probate court to locate my father's original will. I'm ready to make this official." Then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I sat down and wrote a Facebook post of my own. Not defensive, not angry, just honest. I explained that there were two sides to every story, that I loved my mother, but couldn't continue enabling financial dysfunction, that I was simply asking for the truth about my father's estate to be honored. I didn't attack, I didn't accuse, I just stated facts. I knew most people wouldn't believe me. But someday Leo would be old enough to read it and understand that his mother had fought for the truth even when it was hard. Even when she was alone. Even when it would have been easier to surrender. That had to be enough. Patricia worked quickly. By Monday morning, she had drafted a formal letter that went out via certified mail to both my mother and Lily. I'd given her permission to make it clear and uncompromising. The letter laid out exactly what was at stake. Ms. Carter is willing to discuss a settlement out of court regarding the estate of Robert Carter and the property at issue. However, this discussion must take place in person with all parties present, along with legal representation. The meeting will address the following: the existence and contents of Robert Carter's last will and testament, the current debts against the property, the expenditure of funds from the home equity line of credit, and the future of all parties' relationship to the property. If an agreement can be reached, court action can be avoided. If no agreement is reached, Ms. Carter will file a petition with King County Probate Court to challenge the estate settlement from 2005 and investigate whether the estate was properly administered. You have 7 days to respond with your decision to attend this meeting. The letter didn't explicitly threaten, but the implications were clear. A probate investigation would expose everything: the hidden will, the HELOC spending the years of financial exploitation. It would be public record. The community that my mother had so carefully turned against me would see documentation of what really happened. The deadline wasn't arbitrary. Patricia had done her research. The bank's foreclosure timeline meant they had 58 days before the property would be auctioned. If we were going to reach any kind of settlement, it had to happen now. My mother called Patricia's office within 3 hours. She agreed to the meeting. What I didn't know until later, what I wouldn't find out for several weeks, was that Lily had called Marcus that same night drunk and venting. She'd always done that during their marriage, he told me later. Got drunk and complained about her life, her family, her problems. Old habits apparently died hard even 3 years after their divorce. Marcus recorded the call and sent me the audio file weeks later, but he told me the gist of it immediately. Lily had laughed about the meeting. "Emma thinks she's so smart demanding this big confrontation. But we know her. She just needs to feel important. Mom and I will let her vent. We'll cry a little, we'll compromise on something tiny that doesn't matter, and she'll back down like she always does. She doesn't have the stomach for a real fight. She never has." They were so confident, so certain that I was still the same Emma who'd spent 35 years backing down, compromising, accepting less than I deserved to keep the peace. They thought this meeting was my way of saving face before inevitable surrender. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. Patricia and I chose the date carefully. July 19th, a Saturday when everyone would be available. A neutral location, a conference room at Patricia's law firm, and exactly 20 years to the day since my father had died. When I told Patricia the significance of the date, she'd smiled grimly. "Your mother will notice. She'll know you're making a point." "Good," I'd said. "This was never about me. This is about honoring what Dad wanted." The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. A navy suit, professional and serious. I wore my father's watch, the one Lily had finally given me from his effects, on my left wrist where I could see it. I arrived at Patricia's office 45 minutes early, my stomach churning but my mind clear. Patricia met me in the conference room. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for 20 years, I said. I just didn't know it until now. We laid out the documents on the table. The original will. Patricia had finally tracked it down through the probate court archives after filing an official request. It had been filed but never processed, buried in records that Margaret had assumed would never be found. We had the letter my father had written to me. We had Marcus's evidence of Lily's manipulation patterns. We had the HELOC records showing where the money had gone. We had my bank statements proving every dollar I'd sent. I sat at the head of the conference table, Patricia to my right, and waited. Margaret and Lily arrived exactly on time, walking in together in a show of united family solidarity. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. She was wearing her church clothes, the ones that made her look like a devout, suffering widow. Lily was beside her, looking pale and drawn. The cancer treatment was visible in her thinness, the way her clothes hung loose. For a moment, I felt a pang of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Attack my sick sister and elderly mother? Then I remembered Leo's face when he'd asked if he was useless. I remembered being 15 and managing household bills because my mother couldn't be bothered to learn. I remembered 35 years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't caring enough, wasn't sacrificing enough. My resolve hardened. They sat down across from me. Margaret's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gerald Foster, sat beside them. Patricia called the meeting to order, stating formally that we were here to discuss the estate of Robert Carter and related property matters, and that all parties had agreed to this mediation in good faith. Margaret started to speak, probably planning to launch into her victim narrative, but I held up my hand. "Before anyone says anything," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I think we should all look at this." I opened my folder and pulled out the document Patricia and I had prepared, a certified copy of my father's original will with James Morrison's signature and seal clear as day. I slid it across the table. The color drained from my mother's face. My mother stared at the document like it was a live snake that had just appeared on the polished conference table. Her hand reached out tentatively, then pulled back. Gerald Foster, her attorney, leaned forward and picked it up, his eyes scanning the pages with increasing alarm. I waited. Patricia had coached me on this: let the silence do the work. Don't rush to fill it with explanations or justifications. Just present the facts and let them speak. "This is Dad's last will and testament," I said finally, my voice calm and clear. "Signed and witnessed on March 3rd, 2005, 4 months before he died. It clearly states his wishes: 50% of the house to me, 30% to Lily, 20% to Mom. When he died, Mom told probate court that he died intestate without a will, which gave her 50% as surviving spouse and split the remaining 50% between Lily and me. But that's not what Dad wanted." I slid additional copies across the table to my mother and Lily. This will was filed with attorney James Morrison. When Morrison retired, his files were transferred to Burton and Associates. I tracked it down through archived probate records. It took time, but public records don't disappear, they just get buried. This document was never legally voided or superseded. It was simply hidden. Margaret's face had gone from white to a mottled red. Gerald Foster was reading the will carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each paragraph. He leaned over and whispered something to my mother, who shook her head violently. "We need a recess," Foster said abruptly. "I need to consult with my client." Patricia looked at me. I nodded. "You can have 5 minutes," Patricia said. They stepped out into the hallway, Gerald's voice already rising in what sounded like urgent advice being rejected. Lily stayed seated, staring at the copy of the will in front of her like she'd never seen it before. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. When they returned, my mother's mask was back in place, but I could see the cracks in it. Foster looked like a man who'd just been told to argue that the sky was green. He sat down heavily and said nothing. Margaret spoke instead, her voice tight but defiant. "Your father was wrong." The words hung in the air. Patricia's pen paused mid-note. "He didn't understand what Lily needed." My mother continued, her voice gaining strength as she worked herself into her justification. "She was only 12 when he made that will. 12 years old, Emma. She needed more protection than you. You were already so independent, so capable. You didn't need as much. I was his wife. I deserved more say in what happened to our home, to our family. The will was unfair." "So you hid it," I said quietly. "I didn't hide it to hurt anyone. I hid it to do what was actually fair for this family. Your father loved you, but he didn't understand Lily like I did. He thought giving you more money would help you, but what Lily needed was security. She needed to know she'd always have a home." I felt something close to pity watching my mother rationalize 20 years of fraud. She genuinely believed this. She'd convinced herself that her judgment was superior to my father's stated wishes, that being his widow gave her the right to override his legal documents, that her version of fairness trumped his. "So you committed fraud," I said, keeping my voice level, "because you knew better than Dad what was best for everyone." Foster actually put his head in his hands. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Lily spoke. "Just stop, Mom." Her voice was so quiet we almost didn't hear it. "Just stop pretending this was some noble thing." Everyone turned to look at her. Lily was crying, but these weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen in her Facebook video. These were raw, broken tears. "I knew about the will," she said, looking at me for the first time since the meeting started. "Mom told me about it years ago, right after I turned 18. She said Dad had favored you, that he didn't care about me as much because I wasn't smart like you. She said we needed to stick together to protect ourselves from you taking everything." Margaret reached for Lily's arm, but Lily shook her off. "I believed her," Lily continued, her voice breaking. "I believed you were the enemy, that you'd use anything you could get against me. And then I got sick." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened a folder of medical documents, sliding the phone across the table to me. Oncology reports, treatment schedules, bills. So many bills. "Stage 2 thyroid cancer, diagnosed 8 months ago. I've been in treatment since February. The money you've been sending Emma, I needed it for medical bills. My insurance only covers 60%. The rest is on me, and I can't work full-time during treatment. I'm drowning in debt." My chest tightened. All those months of money requests, and I'd thought she was being lazy or manipulative. She'd been sick and terrified. "But I couldn't just ask you for help," Lily said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Mom had spent years telling me that you only help people when you can feel superior about it, that you'd use my illness to prove you were the better daughter, that you'd hold it over me forever. So I let her handle it. I let her ask for money on my behalf and tell whatever stories she needed to tell. And when she came up with the plan to add your name to the deed with the HELOC debt, I went along with it because I was desperate and scared and I didn't know what else to do." She looked at Margaret, and for the first time I saw something other than dependence in that look. I saw anger. "You told me she'd never help unless we forced her. You told me she'd take the house and leave us with nothing. You made me believe my own sister was the enemy." The silence in that room was profound. I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not the manipulative schemer from Marcus's report, but a woman who'd been shaped by our mother's poison, the same way I had, just in a different direction. Where Margaret had taught me that love meant endless sacrifice, she'd taught Lily that love meant endless dependence. Where she'd made me the workhorse, she'd made Lily the victim. And neither of us had been allowed to be whole people. "Lily," I said, my voice rough with emotion I hadn't expected to feel. "Why didn't you just tell me you were sick?" Lily looked at me with eyes that were red and raw from crying, and when she spoke, her voice carried 20 years of poison that had been dripping into her consciousness since she was 12 years old. "Because Mom taught me that you wouldn't help unless you could feel superior about it," she said. "That you'd make it about how strong you are and how weak I am. That you'd use my cancer to prove you were the better daughter, the one who had her life together while I was falling apart. She told me that's how you are. You help people so you can feel good about yourself, so you can remind them they needed you." She turned to look at Margaret, and there was accusation in that look. And I believed her, because that's what she did. Every time she helped me, she made sure I knew I was helpless without her. That I couldn't survive on my own. That I needed her protection from the world, from responsibilities from you. I thought all help came with that price, that being helped meant being reminded of your inadequacy. Lily's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "When I got diagnosed, I was terrified. Not just of dying, though I was scared of that too. I was terrified of being alone. Emma, look at my life. I don't have a husband. I don't have a career. I have 3 kids and no real way to support them if something happens to me. I have Mom, and I have this house. That's it. If I lost those, I'd have nothing." She pulled her hands back across the table, wrapping them around herself. "So, when Mom said we needed to protect ourselves from you trying to take the house, I went along with it. I helped her plan how to get you to pay the HELOC. I researched the legal angles. I'm not sitting here pretending I'm innocent. I'm not the helpless victim I've played for 30 years. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I was scared and I was sick, and Mom convinced me it was us against you. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I'm just answering your question. I didn't tell you I was sick because I was taught to believe that asking you for help would cost me my dignity." I had to take a moment to process this. The sister I'd thought I knew had never existed. There was no innocent Lily who needed protection, and there was no calculating villain either. There was just a woman who'd been systematically crippled by our mother's need to be needed, who'd learned that helplessness was currency and that independence meant abandonment. I turned to Margaret, who'd been sitting rigid in her chair throughout Lily's confession. "Is that true, Mom? Did you tell Lily that I would weaponize her cancer?" Margaret's chin lifted defensively. "I was protecting her from disappointment. You've always been so independent, so self-sufficient. You don't understand what it's like to need someone. Lily needed to understand that she couldn't rely on you the way she could rely on me. I was being realistic, not cruel." The words landed like stones. Even now, confronted with the damage she'd caused, my mother couldn't see it. She'd spent years poisoning Lily against me, but in her mind it had been protection. She'd made Lily dependent and afraid, but she called it love. "You didn't protect her, Mom," I said, and I was surprised by how sad my voice sounded rather than angry. "You made her dependent so you'd stay necessary. You taught her that she couldn't survive without you, so you'd never have to survive without her. You did to her what your own mother did to you." Margaret's face flushed red, and for a moment I saw pure rage flash across her features. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this! You don't know anything about my mother!" But I did know. I'd heard the stories growing up, the carefully edited versions of Margaret's childhood, with a controlling, critical mother who made love conditional on compliance. Margaret had always said she'd sworn to be different, to be warmer, to give her daughters what she'd never had. And she had been different, her tactics were different, her methods were different. But the core was the same. Control through conditional love. Making your children small so you could feel necessary. The cycle had just taken a different shape. I took a deep breath and opened the folder Patricia had prepared. "Here's what I propose," I said, laying out the calculations we'd worked on for days. The house will be sold. According to Dad's will, I'm entitled to 50%, which would be roughly $225,000 from a $450,000 sale. But I'm not taking that. I'll take $120,000, $60,000 to cover what I paid on the mortgage and $60,000 to cover approximately half of what I've provided in support over 3 years. That leaves $330,000. I slid a paper across to Lily. I'll pay $40,000 of your medical debt directly to the hospital. Not to you, I'll coordinate with the billing department and pay it myself. That brings my total to $160,000 and leaves $290,000 remaining. After paying off the HELOC balance of $78,000, that leaves $212,000 to split between Mom and Lily however you want. You can live together, you can live separately, but you'll both have enough for a down payment on modest places and some cushion for expenses. Patricia had told me this was too generous, that I was entitled to more, that I should take what the will specified. But I didn't want to bleed them dry. I wanted resolution, not revenge. This is generous given my legal rights, I said. But I'm offering it because I don't want to destroy you. I want this to end. Margaret stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Gerald Foster was scribbling notes frantically, probably calculating whether this was better than what his client would get if this went to court. Lily had her hand over her mouth, tears still streaming down her face. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice hollow. And if we don't agree to this? I met my mother's eyes across the table and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. There was no anger in my voice, no satisfaction, just facts. If you don't agree, I'll file a petition with probate court to enforce Dad's will. The court will order the estate reopened, which means every financial transaction since 2005 will be scrutinized. They'll want to know where the HELOC money went, why you claimed Dad died intestate when he didn't, whether you committed fraud in the estate administration. You could face legal penalties beyond just losing money. Fraud in probate cases can carry significant consequences. Gerald Foster's pen had stopped moving. He was staring at his notepad like he wished he could disappear into it. I continued, my voice steady. Meanwhile, the foreclosure clock is still ticking. In 43 days, the bank will auction this house. During probate litigation, no one can sell the property without court approval, and that process takes months, sometimes over a year. So you'll lose the house to foreclosure while we're fighting in court over who should have had it in the first place. My offer lets you walk away with money and dignity. Rejecting it gets you nothing but legal bills, public scandal, and possibly criminal charges. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Margaret's face had gone through several colors, red-white now, a mottled combination. Her hands were clenched on the table so tightly, her knuckles were bone white. It was Lily who broke first. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We have to accept this." Margaret's head snapped toward her. "Lily." "No, Mom, listen to me for once." Lily's voice was getting stronger, like she was finding something she'd lost years ago. "I can't fight this. I'm too sick. I'm too tired. And Emma's right. If we go to court, we'll lose everything. We'll lose the house to the bank, we'll have legal fees we can't pay, and the whole community will see exactly what we did. Is that what you want?" "This is your father's house," Margaret said, and her voice had taken on a desperate quality I'd never heard before. "This is my home. I've lived here for 30 years. I won't be bullied out of it by my own daughter." Something in Lily snapped. I watched it happen, saw the moment when she stopped being the dependent daughter and became something else entirely. "Bullied?" Lily's voice rose. "You're not being bullied, Mom. You're facing consequences. You lied about the will, you hid it for 20 years. You stole from Emma because that's what it was stealing, and now you're calling it bullying when she asks for basic fairness." Margaret recoiled like she'd been slapped. "How can you take her side after everything I've done for you?" "You mean after everything you've done to me?" Lily shot back. "You made me helpless. You convinced me I couldn't survive without you. You poisoned me against my own sister because you needed me dependent. This isn't love, Mom. This is control, and I'm done." I watched the dynamic between them shatter in real time. For 32 years, they'd been a unit against the world against me. Margaret had created Lily's dependence, and Lily had accepted it because it was easier than growing up. But now, faced with losing everything, Lily was choosing reality over the delusion my mother had carefully constructed. Margaret looked at Lily like she was a stranger. "You don't mean that." "I do," Lily said quietly. "I'm signing, with or without you." What followed was 2 of the longest hours of my life. Margaret cycled through every tactic she'd ever used, crying, raging, pleading, guilt-tripping, playing victim. She accused me of destroying the family. She accused Lily of betrayal. She brought up my father, saying he'd be ashamed of all of us. She tried to rewrite history, claiming she'd always planned to share the house fairly, but Emma had jumped the gun. Gerald Foster tried multiple times to get her to see reason to understand that Emma's offer was far better than anything they'd get in court. Patricia sat quietly taking notes, letting them exhaust themselves. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, Margaret signed. Her hand shook so badly she could barely write her name, and tears were streaming down her face, but she signed. The moment the pen left the paper, something changed in the air. The fight went out of everyone. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just a profound exhaustion that settled over the room like dust. I gathered my papers slowly, carefully. Patricia was organizing copies for everyone. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the table and refusing to meet my eyes, and at Lily, who looked like she'd aged a decade in the past few hours. "The house will be listed next week," I said, my voice flat with fatigue. "You'll have 60 days from the sale date to move out. I'll coordinate directly with Lily's hospital about the medical debt payment. After that, I need space from both of you. I need time." Margaret said nothing. Lily nodded, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. I walked out of that conference room with Patricia beside me. We took the elevator down in silence. It wasn't until I was in my car and the parking garage door closed, engine running, that I let myself feel it all. I cried. Not pretty tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that felt like they were being pulled from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for the 35 years I'd wasted chasing approval that was never going to come. I cried for my father, who'd tried to protect me and failed. I cried for Lily, who'd been broken by our mother's need to be needed. I cried for Leo, who'd been hurt by a family dysfunction that should have ended with me. But underneath the grief there was something else. A lightness I hadn't felt in decades. I'd finally put down a burden I'd been carrying since I was 15 years old. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. 3 weeks later, the house sold for $465,000, $15,000 more than we'd estimated. The market had been good to us in that one small way. I was in my office when my phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. It took me a moment to realize it was Lily's new number. "Can we talk?" I stared at those 3 words for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen, not sure if I had anything left to say to her. I didn't respond to Lily's text right away. I sat with it for a day, thinking about whether I had the emotional capacity to engage with her again so soon after everything. But then she sent another message. "I'm packing to move. Found something of Dad's I think you should have. Can you come by?" That's what got me. Something of Dad's. I texted back that I'd come Saturday morning. When I pulled up to the house, it looked different already. There was a sold sign in the yard, and through the windows I could see stacks of boxes. Margaret's car wasn't in the driveway Lily had mentioned in another text, that our mother had refused my help and hired professional movers maintaining the Cold War that had settled between us since the signing. Lily answered the door looking thinner than she had 3 weeks ago. The cancer treatment was taking its visible toll. Her skin had a grayish cast, and her hair was noticeably thinner. But there was something different in her eyes. She looked tired, but she also looked present in a way I hadn't seen before. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know this is weird." "It's okay," I said, and meant it. The house was chaos. Boxes everywhere, furniture tagged with colored stickers for the estate sale company, a lifetime of accumulation being sorted into keep, sell, or donate. It felt strange seeing the house I'd saved being dismantled. "Mom's getting a one-bedroom apartment in Shoreline," Lily said, following my gaze. "She says she wants to be near the temple. I'm getting a 2-bedroom in Renton, closer to my kids' schools and the medical center. Neither of us are talking to each other much right now." I helped Lily pack for about an hour, wrapping dishes in newspaper and loading books into boxes. We worked mostly in silence, but it wasn't the tense silence I was used to with my family. It was almost comfortable. "Before you go," Lily said as I was getting ready to leave, "I need to give you something." She disappeared into what used to be our mother's bedroom and came back carrying a small wooden box, the kind with a hinged lid and brass clasp. "I found this in the back of Mom's closet when I was packing her things. It was hidden behind some old sweaters wrapped in a plastic bag, like she wanted to make sure it was preserved, but also make sure no one found it." My hands were shaking as I took the box. I knew before I opened it what it would be. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was my father's pocket watch, the one he'd worn every day of my childhood, the one that had been lost after he died. The gold was still bright, the engraving on the back still clear. "To Robert with love, 1985. There was also a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. "I read it," Lily said quietly. "I'm sorry, I know that was wrong, but I needed to understand. Mom must have hidden it after Dad died." The letter was dated July 18th, 2005. The day before my father went into the surgery, he didn't survive. My hands trembled as I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Emma, tomorrow I go in for surgery and I'm afraid I might not come back. If you're reading this, I didn't. I want you to know something important. You are going to spend years trying to earn your mother's approval, and you need to understand that you can't. Not because you're not worthy, but because she doesn't know how to give it. She loves you in her way, but her way is broken. I saw it in how she was raised, and I see it in how she's raising you and Lily. I tried to change it, but some things can't be fixed from the outside. Don't spend your life trying to fix her or win her over. Instead, spend it building a life so full of love and purpose that her approval becomes irrelevant. You're my daughter, Emma. You have my strength, my integrity, and my stubbornness. Use them to protect yourself, not just others. And please teach your children something I failed to teach you, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who diminish you. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I see who you are and who you're becoming, and I know you're going to be extraordinary. Keep this watch. When you look at it, remember that time is precious. Don't waste it on people who don't value you. All my love. Dad." I was crying before I finished reading, tears dropping onto the paper and smudging the ink. My father had known. He'd seen what our mother was doing to me, and he'd tried to give me permission to walk away to save myself. But she'd hidden this too, just like the will. She'd taken his final gift to me and buried it in the back of her closet for 20 years. Lily was crying too. "He knew Emma. He knew how Mom was, and he tried to protect you, but he died before he could." I looked at my sister through my tears, really looked at her, and saw not the enemy who'd schemed against me or the victim who'd needed rescuing. I saw another daughter who'd been wounded by our mother's inability to love without conditions, who'd been shaped by the same dysfunction but in a different direction. "Are you going to be okay?" I asked. Lily wiped her eyes and nodded. "I think so. For the first time in my life, I have to take care of myself. It's terrifying, but it's also kind of freeing. I'm learning to cook. I'm figuring out how to budget. I'm actually parenting my kids instead of having Mom do it. It's hard, but I'm not drowning anymore." Without thinking about it, I stepped forward and hugged her. It was awkward. We hadn't hugged in years and brief. But it was real. "If you need help," I said, pulling back, "real help, not money, you can call me. But I can't be your rescue anymore. I can't solve your problems or save you from consequences. That's not love, that's enabling." Lily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know, and that's probably the most loving thing you've ever said to me." I left with my father's watch and letter and drove home feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not happiness exactly, not closure, but maybe the beginning of it. 6 months passed, and slowly I began to discover what life felt like when you weren't carrying someone else's burden. 6 months of learning what it felt like to live without constant obligation turned into a year, and suddenly it was Christmas again. December 25th, exactly 1 year after Leo had stood shivering in the cold outside my mother's house. I'd thought about skipping Christmas entirely this year, worried that the anniversary would bring back all the pain. But Leo had asked if we could have a real Christmas at our house with decorations and cookies and his grandparents visiting. How could I say no to that? So our living room held a small tree, nothing elaborate, just a 6-footer from the local lot that Leo had insisted on decorating himself with paper snowflakes he'd made at school. They were crooked and enthusiastic, taped on with visible sticky spots, and I thought it was the most beautiful tree I'd ever seen. The mantel had stockings David's mother had knitted, and the kitchen smelled like the sugar cookies Leo and I had spent the afternoon making using cutters and colored frosting, with more enthusiasm than skill. David's parents had flown in from Minnesota, and the house felt full in a way it never had before, not crowded full, with laughter and easy conversation, and people who actually wanted to be there. I watched David's father help Leo set up a new board game, while David's mother showed me photos on her phone of their garden back home, and I realized something that made my chest tight. I wasn't performing. I wasn't managing anyone's emotions or walking on eggshells or trying to prevent someone from being offended. I wasn't keeping score of who'd given what or worrying that my contribution wasn't good enough. I was just being myself in my own home with people who liked me exactly as I was. "You okay, honey?" David's mother asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "Yeah," I said, wiping at my eyes quickly. "I'm just really happy. That's all." She squeezed my hand, understanding without needing explanation. That was the thing about David's family. They were kind without keeping track, loving without conditions. I was still getting used to it. The doorbell rang just as we were setting out dinner. I looked at David, confused. We weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Lily was standing on my porch holding a small gift bag and looking like she might bolt at any moment. "I know I should have called first," she said quickly. "I can go if this is weird. I just thought it's Christmas and I didn't want I can leave." I stood there for a moment, processing. Part of me wanted to close the door, protect the peace I'd built, keep this perfect day unmarred by complicated family dynamics. But another part of me, the part that was learning to be different, recognized the courage it took for Lily to show up here. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Just for a little while." Lily entered like she was walking into foreign territory, which I suppose she was. She greeted David and his parents politely, appropriately warm, without being overly familiar. When Leo came bounding over to see who'd arrived, Lily handed him the gift bag. "I didn't know what you were into," she said, "but I thought you might like this." Leo pulled out a book, a middle-grade novel about a kid who built robots. His face lit up. "This looks awesome." "Thank you, Aunt Lily." She stayed for about 45 minutes. She admired Leo's paper snowflakes on the tree. She complimented David's mother's knitting. She ate a cookie and said it was delicious, even though we both knew it was too sweet, and the icing was applied with more enthusiasm than technique. She didn't mention our mother. She didn't mention the house or the money or anything that had happened. She just tried to be a person visiting family at Christmas. When she was getting ready to leave, she hugged me at the door. It was less awkward than the last time, more genuine. "Thank you for not shutting me out completely," she said quietly. "I'm still learning how to be a sister instead of whatever I was before." "We're both learning," I said. "Merry Christmas, Lily. Merry Christmas, Emma." After dinner, after David's parents had retired to the guest room and Leo had gone to bed surrounded by new books and games, David and I sat by the dying fire. The house was quiet except for the occasional pop of settling embers. "How are you feeling?" David asked. "Really?" I thought about it, trying to be honest. "I feel lighter, like I've been carrying a backpack full of rocks my whole life and I finally put it down. My shoulders don't ache anymore. No regrets. About Mom. I shook my head. I'm sad. We haven't spoken in 6 months, and I don't know if we ever will. But I'm not guilty anymore. I gave her every chance. I offered generosity she didn't deserve. She chose bitterness over relationship. That's her choice, not my failure. David pulled me closer, and I rested my head on his shoulder. And Lily, he asked. I don't know if we'll ever be close, I admitted. Too much has happened. But I think she's trying. She's actually parenting her kids now. She's working full-time. She's building something for herself instead of just depending on other people to build it for her. That's enough for now. I looked around our living room, small, cluttered with Leo's art projects and David's work papers, nothing like the pristine showcase homes in magazines. But it was ours. It was filled with people who chose to be here, who loved without keeping score, who didn't make love conditional on service. This is home, I said. Not a building, not a blood obligation, just love without conditions. David kissed the top of my head. We sat there in the firelight for a while longer, peaceful and quiet. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. I picked it up and my stomach clenched when I read it. I suppose you're happy now? Margaret. Somehow she'd gotten a new number or she was texting from someone else's phone. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't let me have peace. I stared at that text message for a long time. I suppose you're happy now? Even through the screen, I could feel the venom, the bitterness, the absolute refusal to accept any responsibility for what had happened. I didn't respond. I set the phone down and went back to sitting with David by the fire. But Margaret didn't stop at one message. The next day, another text from the same number. You've destroyed this family. I hope you can live with yourself. The day after that, your father would be ashamed of you. By the end of the week, I'd received 7 messages, each one a variation on the same theme. I was ungrateful. I was cruel. I had abandoned my sick sister and elderly mother. Lily was apparently still in contact with me while Margaret was shut out, which made me a hypocrite and made Margaret the true victim of my selective cruelty. Not once did any message include the words, I'm sorry, or I was wrong. Not once did my mother acknowledge that hiding a will for 20 years might have been problematic, or that throwing my 10-year-old son into the cold might have been abusive. Every message was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt myself, to pull me back into the role of the daughter who managed her mother's emotions at the cost of her own peace. I'd started seeing a therapist in October, something I probably should have done years ago. Dr. Sarah Chen was a calm, practical woman in her 50s who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. When I showed her the messages during our session, she read them carefully and then looked at me over her glasses. What do you notice about these? She asked. That she's angry, I said. Yes. But what else? I read them again. That she's trying to make me feel guilty. Exactly. She's trying to reassert control. By making herself the victim of your choices, she's attempting to pull you back into the old dynamic where you manage her emotions and sacrifice your boundaries to keep her comfortable. This isn't an apology, Emma. It's a summons. She's calling you back to your old role, and she's angry that you're not complying. Dr. Chen was right. My mother hadn't changed. She'd just lost her leverage, the house, the financial dependence, Lily's complete cooperation, and she was flailing for a new way to hook me back in. The messages were bait designed to provoke a response, any response, because even an angry reply would give her something to work with, something to twist into evidence of my cruelty or her victimhood. I spent the next week drafting responses. Angry ones where I listed everything she'd done wrong. Sad ones where I explained how much she'd hurt me. Clinical ones where I laid out the facts dispassionately. Conciliatory ones where I tried one more time to explain my boundaries and invite actual reconciliation if she was willing to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. But every draft felt wrong. Because the truth was, no matter what I said, she wouldn't hear it. I'd spent 35 years trying to make my mother understand me, trying to explain myself clearly enough that she'd finally see my perspective. But she didn't want to see it. She wanted me to apologize for existing in a way that didn't center her needs. Some people cannot hear you no matter how clearly you speak, and continuing to try only drains you. I blocked the number. It felt simultaneously momentous and anticlimactic. Just a few taps on my phone screen and the messages stopped. I wouldn't know if she tried to contact me again. I wouldn't see her guilt trips or her accusations or her rewritten history where she was always the victim and I was always the villain. That night I did something Dr. Chen had suggested. I wrote a letter to my mother knowing I would never send it. Mom. I wrote, I wanted you to be someone you're not. I wanted you to wake up one day and see how you hurt me and apologize and we'd heal together like families do in movies. But you're never going to be that person. You're going to die believing you were the wronged party in all of this, and I've had to accept that. I don't hate you. I actually don't feel much of anything toward you anymore, except a kind of sad distance. I'm just done waiting for you to love me the way I needed. I hope you find peace somehow, but I can't sacrifice my peace to give you yours anymore. Goodbye. I put the letter in my desk drawer in a folder labeled Unsent. It joined a dozen other letters I'd written over the years to my mother, to my father, to younger versions of myself. Tangible proof of my attempts to be heard by people who couldn't or wouldn't listen. The next 3 months passed in a kind of peaceful monotony. Work-family dinners, Leo's basketball games, ordinary life without crisis or drama, or someone else's emergency becoming my problem. It was remarkable how much energy I'd spent managing other people's chaos, and how much space opened up in my life when I stopped. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late March, my phone rang. Lily's name on the screen. Emma, she said, her voice tight with stress. Mom's in the hospital. She fell yesterday and broke her hip. They did surgery last night and she's stable, but she's asking for you. My hand tightened on the phone. Is she okay? Physically, yes, but Emma... Lily paused. She's asking for you. She keeps saying your name. I don't know if this is real or if she's just trying to manipulate you again, but I thought you should know. I stood in my kitchen coffee getting cold on the counter and faced a choice I'd hoped I'd never have to make. I didn't rush to the hospital. That would have been the old Emma dropping everything running to fix the crisis, managing everyone's emotions at the expense of her own peace. Instead, I told Lily I needed to think about it and would let her know. I talked to David that night. Part of me feels like I should go, I said. She's hurt. She's my mother. But another part of me knows she's going to use this to try to manipulate me back into the old dynamic. What does your gut tell you? David asked. That I can check on her without surrendering my boundaries. That being compassionate doesn't mean being stupid. I called Dr. Chen the next morning and got an emergency session. If you go, she said, go on your terms, not rushing there like she's dying, not bringing Leo into it, not expecting reconciliation. You're visiting a person who's injured and that person happens to be your mother. But you're not agreeing to go back to the way things were. So the next afternoon I went to Swedish Medical Center during normal visiting hours, not in the middle of the night, not in a panic. I went alone, leaving Leo with David because my son didn't need to see whatever was about to happen. The hospital room was on the 4th floor orthopedics ward. I stood outside the door for a moment, steadying my breathing, reminding myself why I was here. Not to reconcile, not to forgive, just to check on a human being who was hurt. When I walked in, my mother looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She was propped up in the hospital bed, her leg in a cast, her hair limp and unwashed, her face gray with pain and age. For a moment, seeing her like that, I felt the old guilt surge up. Maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe I should have just kept the peace. Maybe family was supposed to be more important than money or justice or boundaries. But then I remembered Leo's face when he'd asked if he was useless. I remembered my father's letter. I remembered 35 years of being told I was never quite enough. The guilt receded, replaced by something clearer and calmer. I knew you'd come. My mother said, her voice weak but still carrying that familiar tone of triumph. You always come back. I pulled a chair over to the bedside but didn't sit close. I came because you're hurt and you're my mother. But I'm not back, Mom. Things haven't changed between us. Her face hardened, the victim mask slipping back into place. So you're just here to gloat, to see me helpless in a hospital bed? Is this what makes you happy? No, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm here because I can separate your medical emergency from our relationship problems. You're a person in pain and I have compassion for that. But compassion doesn't mean I forget what happened or accept responsibility for your choices. She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I don't understand you anymore, Emma. You used to be such a good daughter. I used to be a doormat, I corrected gently. There's a difference. We talked for about 20 minutes. I asked about her surgery, about her recovery timeline, about her pain management. She answered in short, sullen sentences, clearly confused that I wasn't playing my old role of apologizing and fixing everything. I asked if Lily was handling the logistics of her care, and Margaret said yes. Lily had been visiting every day. Do you need anything? I asked. Is your insurance covering everything, or do you need help with medical bills? Margaret's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why would you offer that? Because you're hurt and medical bills are expensive. If you need help, I can contribute. I'm not offering to take over your life or manage everything for you. I'm just asking if you need financial help with this specific situation. I don't want your charity, she said, but there was less venom in it than I expected. More confusion. It's not charity, it's a daughter helping her mother through a medical crisis. But I understand if you'd rather handle it yourself. The conversation limped along for a few more minutes, awkward and stilted. Margaret kept trying to pull me into the old patterns, guilt trips, accusations, demands for reassurance. I didn't engage with any of it. I was polite but distant, compassionate but boundaried. When I stood to leave, Margaret said, "That's it. You're just leaving. I came to check on you. You're stable, you're being cared for, and Lily's handling your immediate needs. If something changes or if you need specific help, Lily knows how to reach me." You're really not coming back, are you? For the first time, she sounded less angry and more bewildered. Not to the old relationship, no. But I'm also not wishing you harm. I hope you heal well, Mom. I hope you find peace. I walked out before she could respond. In the elevator down to the parking garage, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not regret I'd done the right thing, but grief for what would never be. My mother would probably never understand why I'd set boundaries. She'd probably die believing I was the villain in her story. And I had to be okay with that. As I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, I realized something that made me pull over into a parking lot just to sit with the thought. Leo was 11 now, almost 12. The same age I'd been when I started taking on adult responsibilities, when my role as family caretaker had begun to solidify. But Leo wasn't taking care of anyone. He was playing basketball and reading books about robots and being a kid. He had a mother who set boundaries, who said no when she needed to, who modeled that love didn't mean endless sacrifice. He had parents who showed him that you could care about people without letting them destroy you. The cycle had been broken. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but decisively. And that was worth every hard conversation, every loss, every moment of grief. I started the car and drove home to my family. That evening with Leo in the hospital parking lot stayed with me. The realization that he was almost the same age I'd been when my role as family caretaker had solidified felt like both a warning and an opportunity. I had a chance to do for him what no one had done for me, to teach him that love didn't require self-erasure. A few weeks after my hospital visit with Margaret, I found Leo in his room doing homework. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Can we talk about something?" He looked up from his math worksheet, instantly wary. Kids always know when a talk is coming. "You know how things have been complicated with Grandma?" I asked. "I want to explain some things to you in a way that makes sense." Leo set down his pencil. "Okay. I chose my words carefully, trying to translate complex adult dysfunction into language an 11-year-old could understand without being burdened by it. Sometimes people we love don't know how to love us in healthy ways. They might use words that hurt us or make us feel like we have to earn their love by being useful or quiet or perfect. When that happens, we have a choice. We can keep trying to change them and hope they'll see how they're hurting us, or we can protect ourselves by setting boundaries. What are boundaries? Leo asked. Boundaries are like deciding how much time and energy you give someone based on how they treat you. It's saying, I care about you, but I won't let you hurt me anymore. Does that make sense? Leo thought about it. Is that what you did with Grandma? I nodded. Yes. I love Grandma and I hope she's doing okay. But being around her was hurting me and hurting you. Remember when she said those things to you on Christmas? That was wrong, and it wasn't the first time she'd said things like that, so I chose to step back. That doesn't make me a bad daughter. It makes me someone who values my own health and yours. Do you miss her? Leo asked, and there was such genuine curiosity in his voice, no judgment. Sometimes, I admitted. I miss the mom I wish I had, but I don't miss the way she actually treated me. And that's okay. You can love someone and still need distance from them. I took a breath and moved to the part I really needed him to hear. Leo, I want you to know something really important. My love for you is not conditional. You don't have to earn it by being perfect or helpful or quiet. You don't have to take care of my feelings or manage my emotions. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to have bad days. You're allowed to just be a kid. And when you're grown, you're allowed to disagree with me, to make different choices than I would make, and I'll still love you. I saw his eyes start to glisten with tears, and my heart clenched. Why are you crying, buddy? Because I was worried. He said, his voice small. After what happened with Grandma, I thought maybe if I made you mad enough, you'd make me leave too. Like if I wasn't good enough, or if I messed up too much, you'd stop loving me. The words hit me like a physical blow. My 11-year-old son had been carrying this fear for over a year, and I hadn't known. I pulled him close, feeling him shake with quiet sobs. Never, I said fiercely into his hair. Leo, listen to me. Never. You're my son. That bond doesn't break just because we have conflicts. I'm going to mess up as a mom sometimes. I'm going to make mistakes and probably say the wrong thing and handle situations badly. And when I do, I want you to tell me. We'll figure it out together. But nothing you do will make me stop loving you. Nothing. We sat like that for a long time, Leo crying, and me holding him, both of us releasing fears we'd been carrying silently. After that conversation, I became more intentional about modeling the lessons I wanted Leo to learn. When my boss asked me to take on an extra project that would require weekend work, I said no in front of Leo. My time with my family is important. I explained to my boss, and later I told Leo, it's okay to say no to things that would hurt the people you love, even if it disappoints someone at work. When my friend Rachel asked me to help her move on a day I'd already committed to Leo's basketball game, I said, I love you, but I can't do that. I already have plans with Leo. Rachel understood, and later I explained to Leo, good friends respect your boundaries. If someone gets angry when you can't help them, that's information about them, not about you. I made a point of taking care of myself visibly, not hiding self-care like it was something to be ashamed of. I took Saturday mornings for yoga. I got my hair done without apologizing for the expense. I read books just for pleasure right in the living room where Leo could see me doing something that had no productive purpose except that I enjoyed it. Why do you read if it's not for work or school? Leo asked once. Because I like it, I said simply. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish, Leo. It's how you make sure you have enough energy to take care of the people who matter. If I'm exhausted and empty all the time, I can't be a good mom or a good wife or a good friend. So I fill my own cup first. I watched him process this, saw him internalize a completely different model of what love and family looked like than I'd been taught. He was learning that boundaries were healthy, that love didn't require sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. That he mattered as a whole person, not just as someone useful to others. The cycle was breaking. Not perfectly, not without scars, but decisively. 2 years passed in this steady, healthier rhythm. Leo turned 13, started 8th grade, grew 4 inches, and became nearly as tall as me. Life was remarkably ordinary in the best possible way. Then one Tuesday morning, Lily called. "Emma," she said, her voice thick with crying. "Mom died last night. Another fall. She hit her head this time. She didn't wake up." I stood in my kitchen coffee mug, frozen halfway to my mouth, and felt complicated, sad, relieved, guilty about the relief, grieving, but grieving for what exactly I wasn't sure yet. I told Lily I'd be at the funeral and hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen and cried in a way I hadn't expected. These weren't tears of relief that the difficult relationship was finally over. They weren't tears of release or freedom. They were tears of genuine sadness, deep and aching for something I'd never had and now never would. I wasn't crying for the mother who'd thrown my son into the cold or hidden my father's will or spent 35 years making me feel inadequate. I was crying for the mother who could have been. The one who might have looked at me with pride instead of comparison. The one who could have said, "I'm sorry," and meant it. The one who could have learned and changed and grown. That mother had never existed, but I'd hoped for her anyway, and now even that hope was gone. The funeral was on a Saturday at the Vietnamese temple, where my mother had been a fixture for 3 decades. I sat in the back with David and Leo watching the service from a distance. Person after person stood to share memories of Margaret, her dedication to the temple, her resilience as a widow, her devotion to her daughters. Some of it was even true. My mother had been devoted just in a conditional, controlling way that nobody wanted to acknowledge at a funeral. I didn't correct anyone's narrative. I let them have their memories. Who was I to stand up and say, actually, she was emotionally abusive and committed probate fraud? These people were mourning their version of Margaret, and their grief was real even if it was incomplete. After the service, several distant relatives approached me with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. They'd heard Margaret's version of events, the ungrateful daughter who'd stolen the family home. Most gave me perfunctory condolences before moving away quickly as if dysfunction might be contagious. But as I was getting ready to leave, 2 of my mother's oldest friends pulled me aside. Mrs. Nguyen and Mrs. Tran, women who'd known Margaret since they all immigrated together in the 80s. "Emma," Mrs. Nguyen said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "we just wanted you to know. We knew. We saw how your mother treated you versus Lily all those years. We're sorry we never said anything." Mrs. Tran nodded, her eyes sad. "It wasn't right. The way she favored Lily, the way she expected so much from you and gave so little back. We told her once years ago and she stopped speaking to us for months, so we stayed quiet. We're sorry." I felt something loosen in my chest, validation from unexpected sources. "Thank you for telling me," I managed. "Your father would be proud of you," Mrs. Nguyen said, squeezing my hand. "You're more like him than you know." Over the following week, as Lily handled the estate paperwork, I grappled with a truth I'd been avoiding: there would never be closure. I'd spent years imagining a deathbed reconciliation where my mother would finally apologize, finally acknowledge what she'd done, finally give me the validation I'd been chasing my whole life. But she'd died believing she was the wronged party, the victim of an ungrateful daughter who'd chosen money over family. I would never get the apology I deserved. I would never hear her say she was wrong. I would never have a mother who could love me without conditions. And somehow, I had to be okay with that. "You're not grieving the loss of your mother," Dr. Chen explained in our session. "You're grieving the loss of hope that she'd ever become the mother you needed. That's actually harder than mourning someone who was consistently loving because you're mourning potential instead of reality." Margaret had left a will this time, properly executed and filed. Lily called me a week after the funeral to tell me what was in it. Everything, the remaining $30,000 from her share of the house sale, her personal belongings, her jewelry, went to Lily. There was also a letter which Lily read to me over the phone, her voice shaking. Take care of yourself. Don't trust your sister. She only helps when she gets something from it. Family should mean more than money, but Emma never understood that. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better from her selfishness. Even from the grave, my mother was rewriting history, painting herself as the protective parent and me as the villain. There was no mention of my $60,000. No acknowledgement of the 3 years of financial support. No recognition that I existed except as a warning. Emma, I'm so sorry, Lily said, crying. This is so unfair. I want to split it with you. You deserve... Keep it. I interrupted, surprising myself with how certain I felt. Use it to finish building your life. Pay off your remaining medical debt. Start a savings account. I don't need her money, Lily. And I don't need her last act to be another rejection of me. I've made my peace. Are you sure? I'm sure. She gave you what she had. That's between you and her. It doesn't change anything between you and me. This wasn't martyrdom or noble sacrifice. It was freedom. I genuinely didn't need anything from my mother anymore. Not her money, not her approval, not even fairness in death. She'd already given me everything she had to give, and I'd finally accepted that it would never be enough because she didn't have enough to give. At the small gathering after the funeral, Leo came and stood beside me while I was getting coffee. Mom, he asked quietly, are you sad Grandma died? Everyone nearby went silent, waiting to hear how I'd answer. I knelt down to his level and gave him the most honest answer I could. I looked into my son's eyes, aware that how I answered this question would shape how he understood family love and boundaries for the rest of his life. The room was quiet, people pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Yes, I'm sad Grandma died, I said. But I'm not sad about losing a relationship we never really had. I'm sad that she couldn't be the grandma you deserved or the mom I needed. Does that make sense? Leo thought about it, his face serious. I think so. You're sad about what could have been. Exactly. And that's okay. You can grieve for something that never existed. Later that evening, after everyone had left and Leo was in bed, I sat with David and tried to put into words what I'd learned over the past 2 years. What I wished someone had told me when I was 15, and taking on adult responsibilities while still being treated like a child. Family doesn't mean enduring abuse, I said. That's the thing I wish I'd understood earlier. For so long I thought being a good daughter meant accepting whatever treatment came my way because that's what family does. They stick together no matter what. But that's not love. That's just obligation with a prettier name. David nodded, listening. When someone in your family, your mother, your sister, anyone consistently treats you as less than, exploits, your generosity makes love conditional on compliance, you're allowed to step back. You're allowed to protect yourself. The word family isn't a permission slip for abuse. And setting boundaries with toxic family members isn't betrayal. It's self-preservation. I thought about all the women I knew, especially those in my mother's generation and my own, who'd been taught that family duty trumped everything else. Who'd sacrificed their peace, their health, their happiness because walking away from toxic family felt like failure. I spent 35 years thinking my sacrifice was creating family harmony, I continued. But it wasn't. It was enabling dysfunction. Every time I gave without setting limits, I sent the message that my needs didn't matter. And Margaret and Lily heard that message loud and clear. They interpreted it as permission to take more. This was the uncomfortable truth I'd had to face. My generosity without boundaries hadn't helped anyone. It had hurt me, yes, but it had also hurt them by allowing them to never face consequences, never grow, never learn to stand on their own. True generosity requires boundaries, I said, working through the thought. It's, I'll help you with this specific thing, but not everything. I'll support you for this amount of time, but then you need to take over. I love you, but I won't accept mistreatment. Without those boundaries, helping becomes enabling. and the helper becomes an accomplice to their own exploitation. I thought about the women I knew from the temple, from work, from Leo's school. So many of them were givers, helpers, fixers. They prided themselves on being the ones people could count on. But how many of them had lost themselves in the process? How many had given until they were empty, until they didn't even know who they were without someone else's crisis to manage? The hardest thing I had to learn, I said, was that loving someone and setting boundaries with them aren't contradictory. I loved my mother. I still love her memory, complicated as that is. But I couldn't have a close relationship with her without destroying myself. And both of those things can be true at the same time. David took my hand. You're being really hard on yourself. I'm being honest, I corrected. I loved my mother, but I loved myself more. And that had to be enough. With Lily, I love her, but I have clear limits now about what I will and won't tolerate. That's not cold or unfeeling. That's mature love. It's caring about someone's welfare while acknowledging that proximity to them might be harmful. I'd learned something else too, something that had taken Dr. Chen months to help me accept some people would never give me the closure, apology, or acknowledgement I deserved. My mother had gone to her grave believing she was the victim. She'd never validated my pain, never admitted wrongdoing, never given me the reconciliation I'd hoped for. And I'd had to find peace anyway. You can't make someone see your worth, I said. You can only decide that you see it yourself and act accordingly. Waiting for toxic people to validate you is giving them power over your happiness forever. And I'd given my mother enough power. She didn't get to have any more. This was the story I needed Leo to understand as he grew up. Not that family was bad, or that you should cut people off at the first sign of conflict. But that family relationships, like all relationships, should be mutually respectful. That love without boundaries wasn't sustainable. That sometimes the most loving thing you could do for yourself and even for the other person was to step back and let them face the natural consequences of their choices. The victory isn't revenge, I said. It's not seeing your enemies punished or getting everything you're owed. The victory is building a life you don't need to escape from. It's waking up without that knot of dread in your stomach. It's having relationships based on mutual respect instead of obligation. It's being able to say no without guilt consuming you. David pulled me close. You did good, Em. You broke the cycle. I'm trying to, I said. Every day I'm trying to. That night I checked on Leo before I went to bed. He was asleep, peaceful, surrounded by books and the detritus of his hobbies. He looked so much like my father in that moment. The same stubborn jaw, the same peaceful expression when he slept. My father had tried to protect me with legal documents and careful planning. He'd seen the dysfunction and tried to give me tools to escape it. Now I was trying to protect Leo in a different way, not with money or wills, but with lessons about boundaries and self-worth and the difference between love and obligation. The cycle wasn't completely broken. Trauma echoed through generations, and I'd carry scars from my childhood for the rest of my life. But the cycle was interrupted. It was bent. And maybe that was enough. Maybe teaching Leo that he mattered, that his boundaries mattered, that love shouldn't hurt. Maybe that was the truest victory after all. 5 years passed. Margaret had been gone for 3 years now, and in that time life had settled into something I'd never experienced before: peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine contentment. It was Christmas again, and our living room looked nothing like those elaborate celebrations of my childhood. The tree was modest real pine from a local farm, decorated with a mix of ornaments Leo had made over the years, and a few nice ones we'd collected. David was helping Leo untangle a strand of lights, while Lily's 2-year-old daughter, Maya, toddled around their feet, giggling and grabbing at the shiny ornaments within her reach. Lily sat on the couch, visibly pregnant with her second child, watching her daughter with a smile I'd never seen on her face before. She'd met someone, a quiet, stable man named Tom, who worked as a physical therapist 2 years after our mother died. They'd married quietly last year, and Lily had been in remission from the cancer for 3 years now. She still had checkups every 6 months, still carried the fear of recurrence, but she was learning to live with uncertainty instead of being paralyzed by it. "Maya, gentle," Lily called out as her daughter yanked enthusiastically on a paper snowflake. "Uncle David worked hard on those lights." I watched this scene from the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in my hands, and felt something profound settle in my chest. 7 years ago, on a Christmas night, not unlike this one, my son had been thrown out into 5-degree weather and called useless trash. Now he was 16, nearly 6 feet tall, laughing as he showed his little cousin how to hang an ornament without breaking it. No one here was cold. No one was afraid. No one was measuring their words or walking on eggshells. The house was filled with laughter, safety, and people who genuinely chose to be here. I thought about my mother, as I often did around the holidays. Leo barely remembered her. He'd only been 10 when things fell apart, and his memories were fragmentary and confused. Sometimes I felt sad about that he'd never know a version of his grandmother who could have been loving and safe. But mostly, I felt relief. Margaret's inability to change hadn't been my failure, and it hadn't become Leo's burden to carry. Later that evening, after Lily and Tom had taken Maya home and David had gone to bed, Leo found me in the kitchen putting away the last of the dishes. He leaned against the counter, too tall now for me to see him as my little boy, though I still tried. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about Grandma a lot lately." I set down the plate I was drying and gave him my full attention. "Yeah. Do you think she loved us?" It was the kind of question that deserved real thought, real honesty. I took a moment before answering. "I think she loved us the only way she knew how, which wasn't enough and wasn't healthy. She was limited by her own wounds, her own inability to see past her needs. But here's what I've learned. Leo, someone's inability to love you well doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means they're limited. Your worth isn't determined by whether broken people can see it." Leo nodded slowly, processing this. He was old enough now to understand complexity, to hold two truths at once: that someone could love you and still hurt you. That you could grieve someone and still be glad you set boundaries. "And if you take nothing else from our family's story," I continued, "take this: never let anyone, not family, not friends, not romantic partners, make you feel like you have to earn basic respect. You're worthy just by existing. Love shouldn't require you to make yourself smaller." "Is that why you left?" he asked. "Because she made you smaller." "Yes," I said simply. "And because I didn't want you to grow up thinking that's what love looks like." He hugged me then, this teenage son of mine who was usually too cool for prolonged displays of affection. "Thanks, Mom," he said into my shoulder, "for choosing different." After Leo went to bed, I found myself pulling on my coat and stepping out onto the front porch. The December air was crisp and cold snow falling in soft, lazy flakes that caught in my hair and on my eyelashes. I stood there in the quiet, looking out at our small yard with its modest decorations. 7 years ago, almost to the day, Leo had stood in cold like this, shivering, confused, holding a bag of clothes that had been thrown after him like garbage. I'd found him there and driven away, thinking my whole world was ending. I'd been wrong. It hadn't been an ending. It had been the beginning of something better. I thought about the house I'd paid $60,000 to save, the relationship I'd paid my self-worth to maintain, the family structure I'd finally walked away from. I didn't regret the fight. I didn't regret the boundaries. I didn't even regret the years of trying. They'd taught me what I wouldn't accept anymore, who I wouldn't become. Through the window I could see my Christmas tree with its crooked, enthusiastic decorations. I could see the photos on the mantle: Leo at his basketball game, Lily and Tom's wedding, David and me on our anniversary trip. My life was smaller than I'd once imagined it would be. Fewer people in it, less drama, no grand reconciliations or perfect family gatherings. But it was healthier, happier, mine. This time no one was left in the cold. Not my mother, who'd made her choices and lived with them until the end. Not Lily, who'd learned to stand and was still learning. Not Leo, who was safe and loved and learning what healthy relationships looked like. And not me. Not anymore. I turned from the window, stepped back into the warmth, and closed the door on the cold for good. Emma's story isn't just about getting justice or standing up to toxic family members. It's about something deeper, learning that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's self-destruction. For too many of us, especially women who were taught that family comes first, no matter what. We've spent our lives believing that sacrifice equals devotion. But Emma learned what we all need to understand. You can honor your parents without dishonoring yourself. You can love someone and still refuse their mistreatment. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the family scapegoat or the one who gives everything and gets nothing back, I want you to know you're not alone. Your boundaries matter. Your peace matters. You matter. What would you have done in Emma's situation? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this video gave you something to think about, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Every week we share stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you for listening to Emma's story. And remember, this time, no one gets left in the cold.